to you I'll tell how the good old Union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in the heart of Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no coal. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Hello, Tennessee Valley. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio studio in Huntsville, Alabama. Today, Trump is putting coal miners at risk from beyond the metaphorical grave. Democratic State Representative Chris England talks about the state of the Alabama Democratic Party. Right-wing talkers mock the economic concerns of women in Alabama, and more on today's Valley Labor Report. Adam, my mic seems like it's a bit turned up, a bit too loud. Ben, I don't know if you can. I don't know if maybe what I'm hearing in my headphones is not exactly the same, but it feels like it's like a breaking at the top. Like if I speak to, I don't know, but I don't know if that's right or not. If you want to be part of the program, like it feels staticky if I talk loud, but if you want to be part of the program, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call or text 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, anytime. That is always available to you. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, then you can find us online. We're anywhere you find anything online, all at the Valley Labor Report. And we're also on TikTok now. We're on TikTok. We've got a TikTok. You can find us at TVLR FM. So check us out there. Joe has been doing a great job, like clipping little itty bitty segments. We've been doing this for forever, since we've been doing the thing on YouTube. But now he's doing little itty bitty, like 1, 2, 3 minute clips on the TikTok. And he's doing a really good job. He's got some music in there. He's doing some sound effects. Sounds really good. So if you do the TikTok thing, you should follow us there as well. Just a reminder, your support helps us stay on the air. Our largest single source of funding comes directly from our listeners. If you want to become a sustaining member of the program, make a one-time donation, or buy our new hat, you can go to tvlr.fm or our Patreon, patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. So, Adam, let's start off with a blast from the past. I said that we're going to be talking about Trump continuing to put coal miners at risk after he has left office, which is an impressive feat in a in a morally neutral way. It is impressive. It is not a good kind of impressive. But let's go ahead and play this clip from one of his rallies.
Sure thing.
I see over here, Trump digs coal. Look at that. Trump digs coal. That's true. That's true. I do.
Yeah, so, I think that what we can see there is, or what we can imagine there, is that there is an implied bosses at the end of that statement, right? I mean, if I had to, how if I look at you and I say go, I just say go, there's an implied you as the subject, right? When he says Trump digs coal, there is an implied bosses at the end. Trump digs coal, bosses. And I mean, to be fair, Trump even did kind of lay that out in that same speech. Here he talks about ripping up regulations. Adam, let's play that clip.
They didn't have ridiculous regulations that put you out of business. They didn't have these ridiculous rules and regulations that make it impossible for you to compete. So we're going to take that all off the table, folks, and you better do well, and you better compete and make me proud of you, okay? You'll be proud of me, but make me proud of you.
Could you, this is something that I've never understood about people who like Trump, because they're generally speaking, they're like the folks that, that they are masculine and independent and manly, but this kind of like make me proud of you, that's just so condescending. Like, screw you. I don't care if you're proud of me. Like, I don't care, but it's just that
you mean you don't live and breathe to impress New York billionaires?
I do not, actually. I do not live and breathe to impress billionaires. And the coal miners that I know don't either, to be fair. So now, what I think that probably the audience, what a lot of working folks in that audience, and I don't doubt there are lots of working folks in that audience, what they're probably thinking, what they were probably thinking, is that, I don't know, he's going to get rid of, like, feeling regulations or something, right? Because that's what Republicans want you to believe, is that all these regulations, they're just absurd, they're silly, they're frou-frou, they're for women. But I would be willing to bet. I'd be willing to bet money. And I mean, call and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that we do have coal miners that listen to this program. So feel free to call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR if you think that I'm off base here. But I'd be willing to bet that if you went up to folks in that audience, you went up to actual real coal miners, not coal bosses, not, the people that own the mines, I'd be willing to bet that if you went up to folks in the audience that are coal miners, and you said, hey, do you reckon it ought to be easier for mine operators to avoid significant and substantial safety violations? I'm not talking about just, little piddly something or another. I'm talking about, should mine operators be able to avoid significant and substantial safety violations more easily? I'd be willing to bet money that the answer to that from actual coal miners in the audience would be, what the hell? Why would I want that? That's stupid. Why would I want that? That doesn't make any sense. The bosses don't care about me. And what worker actually thinks that the government is too onerous on their bosses as far as safety is concerned? I mean, that's not a thing that happens. Like that, you're not living in the real world if that's what you think workers feel like. So, but that's exactly what the still Republican-controlled, Trump appointee-controlled Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Commission is doing right now. From an article in the, so the Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Board is an independent agency that reviews legal disputes stemming from citations and fines against mining companies. From an article in the Huffington Post by labor reporter Dave Jamieson, the commission is supposed to have 5 sitting members who serve staggered terms and adjudicate cases as a panel. By tradition, the president's party gets 3 members and the other party gets 2. But right now, the agency only has 3 Senate-confirmed commissioners with a 2-to-1 GOP majority. The 2 Republican members, William Alfin and Marco Rajkovic, are longtime lawyers for mining companies.
Oh, imagine that.
That's right. Who were the Trump Republican appointees? They were mining company lawyers. You've literally got foxes guarding the henhouse. There is not a more apt analogy than this.
Right. I mean, these are the people that if you're negotiating a contract or on the other side of the table, these are the people that if you get hurt on the job, will do everything in their power to deny you benefits.
Yes, these are the people that when you as a worker get injured on the job, you as a coal miner get injured down in the mines, these are the people that are going to be fighting against you. These are the people that are going to be saying that you should just toughen up and get back to work on your broken legs. That these are the people that are going to be telling you that you don't deserve workers' compensation. These are the people that are going to be telling you that you should have been more responsible down in the mines. These are going to be the people that are doing everything they can to protect the boss's bottom line and keep money out of your pockets after you've been injured down in the coal mines. And these are the people that Donald Trump appointed to the Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Board. I just don't know what to say. I mean, before we even go into the merits of any individual case, of any individual anything or right, we should be able, I mean, just as rational adults who ostensibly care about other adults, about other people, about our families, it just seems so common sense that we should not have folks determining safety policy implementation who come from a background of fighting against worker safety. I mean, right? I mean, I don't know. Call me if I'm off base, because I know that we've got coal miners that listen to the show. Call me if I'm off base, because I do not think I am. This is crazy. This is Looney Tunes. But Trump loves coal miners.
He won't appoint them to the commission.
Right.
But he loves them, of course.
Of course. The lone Democrat is Art Traynor. He is a union lawyer formerly with the United Mine Workers of America, and he is sounding the alarm about a case involving a subsidiary of Peabody Energy. The case is Secretary of Labor v. Peabody Midwest Mining, LLC, if you want to look it up, where he says, from the article again, that the majority could set a precedent that makes it easier for mine operators to avoid significant and substantial safety violations, saving tens of thousands of dollars in potential fines and avoiding mine shutdowns. Traynor says that the majority's position would make it much harder to enforce a requirement that operators have underground shelters for miners in emergency situations.
Wow.
The Republican Party, ladies and gentlemen, Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen, this is what they're pushing for. They're trying. I mean, just the crassness of the thing. They're trying to make it more difficult to enforce a requirement that there are underground shelters in coal mines. Just the most common sense kind of thing that you should have an emergency shelter in every coal mine. And they're trying to make that more difficult to enforce. And they're trying to make it more easy for coal mining companies to avoid significant and substantial safety violations. Crazy. The UMWA says that Republicans are holding up Biden's 2 nominees to the board. They have cleared the Senate committee, but have not made it to a floor vote. Now, I'm not understanding exactly the logistics of why why the Republicans are able to hold it up. But that's what I don't know. I don't know why the UMWA. I mean, there may be a more conservative union than some, but I don't think that they would just protect Republican U.S. senators. So, I'm willing to take their word on this. but I don't understand exactly the logistics there. But so Biden has 2 nominees up that are that are not coal mining company lawyers, and the Republicans are holding them up.
And he's been in office since January of
Yes.
2021.
Well, we are well into Biden's 2nd year, and the Republicans are still holding up his appointees to the Federal Mine Safety and Health Review Board, which is giving Trump a de facto majority on the board. So the people that are determining the implementation of safety regulations, safety laws, as it relates to coal miners are company lawyers. That is Donald Trump's legacy for coal miners, putting them at risk long after he is gone. So that's something I'm sure he's proud of. Unironically, I'm sure he's proud of that. It's just, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Adam, but
Like you said, foxes guarding the hen house. I mean, that really does say it all right here. And unfortunately, I think if we were to look at these other agencies across the federal government, it would be a very similar story.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people even know that there is such a thing as the Mine Safety Commission?
Right.
And there are boards and agencies like this for industry after industry where, I mean, you don't have to give credit to the Republicans, but in a way, you have to admire the viciousness and competence they've exerted in really destroying these agencies from the inside out, maintaining control over agencies and commissions when they're not even in control of Congress or the White House.
Right.
It'd be nice if people who stood up for us as regular people could be half as effective.
Right. Yeah, somebody in the chat, Rai in our YouTube chat, said nothing he says has anything to do with coal workers. He just wants the industry itself to dominate other coal industries. He wants those coal miners worked to death to compete. That's exactly right. So let's hit another couple of quickies before we head to our first break. Starbucks workers had another big week last week on top of their standard feverish pace of unionization, union election filings, union wins. The NLRB is seeking a bargaining order, which is extremely rare. Extremely rare.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. You'll remember how earlier this month, the NLRB filed a complaint alleging Starbucks committed more than 200 violations of labor law in Buffalo alone. In that region alone, more than 200 violations of labor law. Let's go ahead and put that article up. From the Huffington Post, Dave Jamieson has another. It's Dave Jamieson at the Huffington Post. I mean, the Huffington Post is like kind of a weird outlet as far as sometimes they have a lot of clickbaity stuff, but Dave Jamieson consistently puts out really good content,
right.
Really good reporting. I have a lot of respect for him, and I follow his work quite a lot.
Yeah, I really echo those sentiments. I mean, don't hold it against him that he writes for HuffPost.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get a paycheck. So.
Yeah, he's a legitimately good labor reporter.
His work product speaks for itself, for sure. The title "Starbucks Union Busting" was so bad it forced the NLRB says it should be forced to bargain. So last week, the complaint that was filed about a month ago, alleging more than 200 violations of labor law. Last week, that complaint was amended to include a gazelle bargaining order at one location. That location, Camp Road in Hamburg, New York, voted against unionizing by 12-8, but only after terminating 6 pro-union workers, disciplining and surveilling others, closing stores, and changing work policies. prior to these flagrant violations of labor law, Linda Leslie, a regional director for the NLRB, noted that a majority of the workers had signed authorization cards indicating their support for unionizations, and that, from another article in the Huffington Post by Dave Jamieson, the firing of union supporters and other forms of retaliation make it so that traditional remedies will not do in the case of Camp Road. She says workers made their desire to unionize clear by a majority signing union cards, and that Starbucks should therefore have to bargain with the workers, with the union. So, now, like I said, this is a gazelle bargaining order, which is different from a Joy Silk bargaining order that the NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo is trying to resurrect. We did a deep dive on the resurrection of the Joy Silk doctrine a couple of weeks ago on the show. You can see our go to our YouTube page for that breakdown. But super brass tacks, basically the difference of the Gazelle doctrine versus the Joy Silk doctrine is that to issue a Gazelle bargaining order, it has to be a lot worse. And that's basically the brass tacks, just the bare knuckle kind of bare bones stuff is for a Gazelle bargaining order to be issued, it has to be way worse. The violations of labor law have to be way more systemic. And that's what happened in this case. So because of the incredibly high bar for Gazelle bargaining orders, they're incredibly rare. So this is definitely a big deal for the workers, and it could turn one of Howard Schultz's few W's into an L. Starbucks workers have been winning 80-something% of the elections that they've had. They have now formed almost 80 unions, and they filed for election at almost 300 locations. They've had something like 90 elections, and they've won about 80 of them. So, This would be really great. Jameson does throw some cold water on us before we get to celebrating too much, though. He says that the complaint will be litigated before an administrative law judge who will decide whether Starbucks should have to bargain with workers at the store on Camp Road in Hamburg, New York. The process is subject to appeals and could take years. Not only that, but even just this complaint with the bargaining order took 6 months to prepare.
And now keep in mind, folks, that Starbucks could stop this at any time if they so chose. They could easily announce they would recognize the unions, they would bargain with the unions. All of this is happening because Starbucks is, digging their heels in, and they're determined to fight the union drive by any means necessary.
Right. Yeah. Unionized Tech Temp in the chat says, I'm so pumped about that bargaining order. Indeed, you should be, although, take it with be a little bit sober about it, even though you should be pumped. Strong McAllen says, solidarity from South Carolina. Indeed. South Carolina Starbucks workers just won a union election last week. Eve Gussman says, I don't go to Starbucks, but if any of my local 20 Starbucks do, I will go and show my support. Indeed. That is exactly what you should do, and that is exactly what the workers are asking for you to do. Starbucks workers in Birmingham are having their election next week in person, Wednesday and Thursday, and they are having and the Birmingham DSA is having a sit-in today at 3 o'clock to go show them that you support their unionization efforts. So you should do that if you're in Birmingham. And if you're not in Birmingham, More Perfect Union has a really good map that shows where are Starbucks workers unionizing. You can just Google where are Starbucks workers unionizing, More Perfect Union, and it'll show you the map, and you can find one and see if there's one close to you that you can go and support the workers. And if you do that, if you go to a location with a public union campaign, don't do this at a place without a public union campaign. But if you go to a place with a public union campaign, you should order your drink or your food under the name Union Union, yes. Union strong. Solidarity, something like that.
And in our interview last week with a couple of the folks from the Birmingham Starbucks, they sort of alluded to efforts that aren't public yet, but are happening across the state.
Yes.
So
Yes.
stay tuned. If there's not a local Starbucks yet that's publicly organizing, maybe it's already in the works and we don't know it yet. And also just be thinking if you know anyone who works at a Starbucks. It's possible that you know somebody who works at a store that hasn't organized yet, but maybe you could start having a conversation with them and see what's up.
Yep. Indeed. Thanks, everybody watching on Facebook and on YouTube. Facebook, we've got Joe Marshall and Martha and Mel Sutton in the chat. Appreciate y'all. Good morning. So that brings me to my next topic, though, which is that justice delayed is justice denied, especially in cases like the one at Starbucks. Because working folks, we do not have, unlike the Coke-funded radio guy who had a commercial before we went on the air, who literally gets money from the Koch brothers. I mean, that's not just a generic like, oh, this guy gets money from billionaires. This guy literally, in the proper definition of the word, gets money from Koch brothers. Unlike people like that, people like you and me, because I'm just a regular worker, I do not get paid to do this. Unions and listeners sponsor the show. All of that money goes into running the show. It does not go to me. I don't take any money from this. People like you and me, we don't have the time, we don't have the money to just sit around for years, even for months, even for a month, waiting for resolution when our rights are violated. If protections of our rights to organize are to mean anything, if protections to our right to freely associate, as is given by the Constitution, to speak freely, as is given by the Constitution, are to mean anything, the remedies have to be swift. For that to happen, we need two things. We need an aggressive NLRB and a funded NLRB.
Right.
Let's look at the Starbucks stores in the Buffalo area. From an article by Maxwell Parrott in Jacobin about how the delays hurt workers, the complaint details violations from at least 18 Starbucks locations out of a total of 20 in the Buffalo area. Of those, 4 stores have conclusively voted in favor of a union, 1 has voted against, and another is waiting on a contested vote count. These figures reveal that the majority of stores allegedly affected by Starbucks anti-union actions in Buffalo have not yet filed for election. How is that going to affect workers at stores without campaigns yet? From the article again, Abruzzo described how unlawful anti-union campaigns often start with intimidation and then intensify to retaliation. She wrote that to live up to the NLRB's mission of protecting worker rights, it must be able to do so at the earliest stages of organizing before any workers are terminated. Obviously. And that did not happen in Buffalo. To stop the drawn-out process from obstructing organizing efforts, Abruzzo has urged regional offices to aggressively seek injunctions which had been steadily declining for the past decade until last year. The board typically seeks injunctive relief when employers have tried to slow down union momentum, an outcome that can't necessarily be reversed through a court order. This is what Liebman described as the whole point of an injunction. Liebman is a former NLRB chair under Obama, that there isn't irreparable harm created that cannot really be remedied down the road whenever it is that the NLRB can get around to deciding the case. The NLRB has to be able to act and act swiftly, and it should act swiftly even with a bias towards workers, because let's think about just for a second, what are the ramifications if the NLRB is too is too loosey-goosey with enforcing our right to unionize. If the NLRB is too proactive and makes it so that workers cannot be fired for organizing in too many, like, let's say that somebody is organizing and then they actually do something wrong that would normally actually get them fired, but the NLRB protects them because they're in a union campaign. This is kind of the worst case scenario, right, that you can imagine. The worst case scenario is that an actually bad employee, the employer has to keep them on the payroll for the duration of the union campaign. That is the worst case scenario. What does that actually mean? That the employer loses a small amount of profit and fires them later. What does it mean in the opposite case? Let's go the worst case scenario, which is what the status quo is. The status quo is basically the worst case scenario. And which is what? Which is that workers who are performing well, who are performing satisfactorily, are fired illegally, and 2, 3 years later, the NLRB comes out with a decision that says, yeah, you are illegally fired. The district courts agree, and your employer has to offer you reinstatement. Well, that doesn't do diddly squat for me 3 years later. I could be homeless 3 years later. I'm not going to have a job. I would have a different job 3 years later. I can't just sit around for 3 years while I wait for the government to enforce the damn law. I can't do that. I'm a worker. I live paycheck to paycheck. So I become homeless or I get a different job. And that's exactly what happens. Studies have shown that only 6% of people who are offered reinstatement as a result of violations of labor law actually take the job because they've had to get a different job and they've had to adjust their life around that job. 6%. Does that sound like law and order to you? Does that sound like our rights are being protected? No, of course not. Of course not. And they also need funding. The NLRB has had, when you account for inflation, something like a 30% cut since 2010. We have so many more workers. We have so many more people filing for election since 2010. And they have 30% fewer resources. The Birmingham NLRB office would be fully staffed at, what was it that Joseph Webb told us, the NLRB attorney that we spoke to? He said it would be fully staffed at 11 or 12 employees. Do you know how many staff they have at the NLRB region office in Birmingham? 4. They have 4 people running an entire region. 4 people for all the workers in Alabama. 4 people. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So the Biden administration is trying to push for some more funding for the NLRB, and of course Republicans are fighting against it. Again, look, there's a difference between the two parties. I'm not a big booster of either one, but there's a difference, right? And so anyway, let's seen somebody put loosey goosey on a soundboard for the show. maybe we can do that. I'm not understanding Nick in the YouTube chat. Unions are for class resolution malfeasance as corporations took over disability and then employee benefits as a cost of goods sold because it is income tax free. I'm not really sure that I understand that. DL Sendero asks, are there any updates for the Amazon Bessemer union vote? No, there are not at this point. Let's go ahead and take a break. And on the other side, we're going to be talking to State Representative Chris England about the state of the Alabama Democratic Party.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial working class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
IBW 558 is like a great football team. You've got to have the aptitude, skills, and knowledge to outperform the competition. If you're a non-union electrician, now is the perfect time to get off the sideline and join our team. We have the absolute best wages and benefit package in North Alabama and Southern Tennessee. It's because our team stands together, bargains together, and our families benefit from it. With immediate openings, you have the opportunity to see why the IBW is the right choice.
Energy Alabama is a locally operated and membership-based nonprofit organization focused on advancing Alabama's clean energy future through education and advocacy. Many people in charge of infrastructure and building decisions simply don't know about how viable clean and renewable energy is. To that end, Energy Alabama has provided instruction to more than thousands of adults and tens of thousands of K-12 students across the state. We're working hard to build careers in clean energy and help everyday Alabamians save money on their utility bills. Learn more about our work and how you can join us at energyalabama.org.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker, and Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for this program comes from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 136, out of Central Alabama. Learn more at ibew136.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Come all you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host and fellow agitator is Adam Keller. If you have something to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. You can also text us at the same number. That is 844-899-8857. And you can also reach out to us in the chat. You can throw a little message in the chat on YouTube or Facebook. We monitor those, and we might read that or we might respond if you've got a question there in the chat. Adam, have we got Chris?
Yes, Chris is on the line.
Fantastic.
Hopefully he can hear us okay.
Good deal. So Chris England is the Alabama State House Representative for District 70 in Tuscaloosa, and he is the chair of the Alabama Democratic Party. Chris, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Y'all can hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks for having me this morning.
Absolutely. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
So talk to us about yourself for a second. This is the first time that you've been on the program. You're from Tuscaloosa, and our audience is fairly concentrated in North Alabama, so there may be some folks that aren't too familiar with you. Talk to us about yourself.
So, well, first, good morning, everybody. I am from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I've been in the legislature since 2006. I was first elected at 29 years old, and I'm running for re-election, and I will probably one of the only politicians you'll meet that has never had any opposition. Don't know if that's because I'm doing such a great job or just people just don't care, but I'll take them doing a fantastic job.
There you go.
And I currently serve on the Judiciary Committee, the Insurance Committee, and the Public Safety Committee at the legislature. And I was elected as party chair in November of 2019. So, I mean, those are just some basics about me. And I'm a practicing attorney and a lifelong Democrat.
Yeah, well, I did want to start off by thanking you. I see that you've got your UMWA shirt on there, and you have been probably the most vocal political supporter of the coal miners. You've spoken at a few of their events, and I've seen more than once the party's social media be used to direct donations to the strike fund. Local parties have sent supplies to the strike pantry, and just yesterday I saw the party Twitter shout out the sip-in that is scheduled for tomorrow or for today to support the unionizing baristas in Birmingham who have a vote next week. And Adam, you said that you've got I don't think that I'm on the email list for the Democrats, but you said that you've got to email a couple of times about sending money to the strike fund. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I believe so. And actually, we were on the air maybe a week or two ago and got a message about supporting unions from the Democratic Party. And that was definitely a nice thing to see. And I even sent in a little reply there just to thank you guys for doing that.
It's, I think one of the things about especially a Southern Democratic Party, is making sure that you've got relationships built with the people who are supposed to be your natural allies, especially considering that there's been just erosion of worker rights across the country. That to that end, you've seen many organizations, companies, businesses, and one of the things I'm proud to see is that people are starting to kind of stand up and fight back a little bit and trying to organize. You see efforts in Amazon and Bessemer. We were supportive of those, and Starbucks, and also over in Brookwood. And to be honest with you, some of the folks over in Brookwood are people I've known my entire life, and it just doesn't make sense to me to see people that sacrificed pay, their health, and many other things to keep a company open that now can't expect the same in return. It's really ridiculous to me. And what's even more ridiculous is that we don't have every one of our elected officials, on both sides, speaking out against a out-of-state hedge fund operator that is basically has made it clear that they've got the resources, they can pay, they can compromise, but they much rather break the strike and break the union, which to me is wrong. And I think we should have more people speaking out and more people in support of the folks that aren't working right now.
I mean, when you have BlackRock, the world's largest private equity firm, telling Warrior Met, okay, it's time to settle. You're losing profits because of your obstinance here. I think that I think that it seems like it should be an easy thing for politicians, like you said, on either side to support, and you're not seeing it. One of the stations, we're on a few different stations, but one of the stations that we're on is WVNN. It's a conservative talk radio station, and so because we're on this station, I listen to it all the time. Which is probably bad for my health, but I do it anyway. And nothing. They don't say anything. Nothing about it. And these are people that are supposed to be, they love coal miners, is what they say. And nothing about it. You wouldn't, if the people that listen to WVNN, if they only get their news from the radio, then me being on the radio is the that would be the only time that they hear about this. Because sometimes I'm a guest on some of their shows, and I'll bring it up basically every time I come on. But if I'm not on, if I'm not a guest, or if I'm not hosting this show right now, they never hear about it. It's insane.
Well, it shouldn't be lost on anyone that a company is willing to lose profits, close a mine to not treat their employees fairly. But it should bother everyone that some your fellow Alabamians have been on strike for over a year now.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone should know about it, and I think everybody should be talking about it. And I think Warrior Met should be shamed publicly for how they're treating the employees there.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing, supporting workers, making the party making the party more relevant. That's kind of a big part of your reason for being the party chair in the first place. You ran a contested election in 2018. There was a lot of controversy around that, and you were finally seated, like you said, in 2020. And you won out basically on that promise of reinvigorating the party, making it relevant again. How do you feel about that 4 years out, 3 years out from winning your election?
So we are, for lack of a better term, we're engaging in a very long rebuild. Because even though the Democratic Party was in control of the legislature and partly in control of just about every branch of government for over 140 years, there wasn't exactly party building going on there, more so than it was candidate support. Because there wasn't a brand being built, there wasn't a foundation on policies or principles or democratic principles per se, as much as it was just making sure that we kept incumbents we had a majority for a number's sake. So when 2010 hit and there was a vacuum created on messaging from the Republicans, very effective messaging on the Republican side, there really wasn't a foundation that you could retreat to and say, this is what Democrats are doing or have done for you. And it's largely the same thing that we're dealing with now across the country, because Democrats seem to be afraid to speak about the successes that we've experienced under the Biden administration and, Democratic legislatures across the country. Democrats tend to focus on maybe you'll see the results and ignore the rhetoric. Meanwhile, Republican colleagues use the rhetoric to create the results. So whether or not you've been sold on changing the judiciary so you can protect the cultural war that you're waging, or using division to target people to capitalize off of that, you see the results of it in our commercials. So the Democrats' struggle for relevancy here is to try to maneuver messaging through rhetoric and try to get people to turn their attention back to the things that matter the most, like expanding Medicaid, providing quality education, equal opportunity, regardless of what your zip code is or where you live, and things like that. So what we've wanted to do from the very beginning is start filling that vacuum with opposition so people can know that there is a competing viewpoint, a competing perspective. And it's been difficult to say the least, but I think now you see with our social media activity, the emails, the statements, and so forth, that when there are prevailing issues of the day, you start hearing more from Democrats in our perspective. And I think it's growing. And I'm very excited about the fact that, we've been able to talk about some of these issues and slow some of the more extreme things down, and also draw attention to them so people understand that if we can't affect it legislatively, we can certainly shame you into doing the right thing sometimes. So right. I feel better about that now. But
you mentioned that you mentioned that the national Democrats are undergoing a similar process to the state in Alabama, and Adam had a question about that with the national Democrats, given Biden's low approval rating, Congress is even lower. And you mentioned that you felt like there's some successes, and I feel like for a lot of folks, they're not seeing those, or they're not being told about them.
Right.
It's easy for national Democrats it's easy to see how those would be like a liability in Alabama. What are your thoughts on, national politics versus state politics, the national party versus the state party?
Well, you need to be able to say that the reason that we are experiencing the economy that we are right now, and the successes in Alabama, and also the fact that we've got a very low employment rate, is because the federal investment in our state. And, a lot of our Congress folks, for example, are touting the benefits of the money and pretending like they came up with it by themselves. Democrats in the Biden administration, if you've got projects going on across the state of Alabama right now that are being directly paid for by the federal government as a result of actions taken by the Biden administration. And I don't think anybody should be afraid to talk about those things. But at the same time, because we're such a dramatic super minority, and the numbers indicate that Republicans, this is a bright red state, oftentimes the messaging betrays the mission that we have here in Alabama in terms of how we communicate with our folks. And we're often sacrificed in red states because, quite often we're only focusing on winning elections versus winning discussions, creating great policy, and actually convincing people that our ideas are better. To that end, we are often sacrificed to the point where, there's not any real attention paid to states like Mississippi and Alabama, but the abortion statute that is essentially going to overturn Roe v. Wade, based on all we're seeing, came from Mississippi. So we ignore our plight here in southern and red states to our own demise. So the recent DNC with Jamie Harrison's election has provided some support, more than I think we've seen in the past. But I mean, there's a lot more work to be done. There's a lot more resources necessary for us to begin breaking the Republican supermajority here and start actually competing statewide.
Adam?
Well, yeah, I think on that question, let's just start there. The GOP currently controls all of state government. They have, as you mentioned, a supermajority in the legislature. They control most of our local governments. They dominate the airwaves. They have their own press, like Yellowhammer, 1819. They have their own think tanks, which can, of course, get in the press whenever they want and get in front of legislators. And while we don't talk about it as much, there's a network of churches, frankly, that reinforce their message every Sunday. And on the flip side, you have Democrats who are proposing policies such as some of the ones you've mentioned today: Medicaid expansion, legalizing gambling in the lottery, legalizing marijuana. These are things that would objectively improve quality of life in Alabama. I mean, it's the facts. It would make life better here in this state. But given the far right's just ideological dominance in Alabama, how do Democrats break through that? And I'd love to know kind of what you're thinking so far, now that you've had some time as the chair. What do you think in terms of how can Democrats break through that stranglehold?
Well, I mean, that's a great point, great question. And it, honestly, it starts locally, it starts grassroots, and you build from there. And from Doug Jones's election, although we did not get the result that we wanted, we did see some trends developing that were positive. The turnout on the Democratic side increased tremendously. But we also saw pockets in different areas, especially in the Huntsville area and in the suburbs of Birmingham, and also even in the Auburn, Lee County area, where we saw great turnout better results, and to the point where it creates some optimism in legislative races going forward that there are some chances to flip a few seats. And first and foremost, I think one of the most important things is breaking the Republican supermajority. At this point, with the supermajority, they can operate without Democrats even being in the building. And so oftentimes in debates like that, they're only debating extreme and moderate extreme, if that makes sense. So breaking that Republican supermajority will start giving us a foothold in some of those discussions, which will then create the momentum necessary to start actually winning other places. So that's A. I think there are opportunities there just based upon numbers. But I think most importantly, though, we just can't be afraid to continue to push back on and point out extremism. We can't be afraid to point out that Republicans at times or most times are not operating in the best interest of their constituents, but operating in the best interest of what continues to get them elected. And those are two completely different things. And it's going to take work. It's going to take investment. It's going to take actual people running for office and not being afraid of potentially losing. Because in this situation, when you're rebuilding from the ground up, winning has to be redefined as not just being successful in an election, but also defining what the debate is, defining the terms of the debate. What's interesting, I'll give you an example of that. When Walt Maddox ran against Kay Ivey, some of the platform positions that he articulated in his campaign were adopted and passed by Kay Ivey in our first couple of sessions, whether it be dealing with what she felt like was a prison problem, or passing a tax for roads and bridges, or coming out in support of a lottery. Those were things that Walt was talking about in his campaign. So sometimes you winning doesn't necessarily, it can't be defined by, success in terms of winning and losing the election versus also impacting the debate. So we've got to be aggressive about that. You cannot be afraid to say that we're Democrats and this is what we stand for.
Yeah, I think I really, really agree with you about that. I think that it's important to have the messages out there and to be strident about, what you, and really make a delineation between Republicans and Democrats. I think that that's important, and I don't, it doesn't seem to me that folks are going to get elected as Democrats in Alabama by pretending to be Republicans or being Republican. Like, if they wanted a Republican, they just vote for the Republican. But right. So on the, the idea of framing the debate, do you feel like there is a place for things like messaging bills? One of the things that y'all really fought against in the last legislature, and you were successful, is defeating the Anti-Riot Bill, which would be very harmful for citizens protesting their government and for workers protesting their bosses. And so obviously we were very opposed to that at the Valley Labor Report and in our unions. But it seems to me that perhaps the conversation could have been reoriented if there was introduced, let's say, a constitutional speech bill drafted similarly to the constitutional carry bill, removing the ability for municipalities to stop folks from speaking and protesting, removing the ability for a certain Tuscaloosa County judge to issue injunctions against striking miners, and make Republicans defend that attack on free speech, that attack by a Republican judge on coal miners. And they didn't have to do that. There wasn't a single Republican that was ever asked about or made to answer for the fact that their party was fighting against free speech, their party was fighting against coal miners, and their party was trying to, they just didn't have to answer for that.
I think it's a great point. And on various issues, we do, as a House caucus, file legislation in order to try to put them on defense on several issues. But I think that's a fantastic idea. And, maybe you and I can kind of talk offline about how to draft something that would point out the irony in the party that's supposed to be about freedom, passing legislation to stop it. So, or to curtail it. And I think, that's a great idea. And I think, you've seen the Democrats especially introducing legislation about voting rights, about guns, about ending some of these ridiculous holidays and people we celebrate that, in attempts to do what you're talking about. And I think to kind of expand that discussion, we do need to introduce legislation that not necessarily responds in kind, but actually points out the hypocrisy and puts forth sound policy where they do have to answer for some of the more extreme positions that they're taking.
Yeah, and you also mentioned about breaking the supermajority. I mean, that's definitely got to be the first step. And, just from my perspective, and this is not at all that I think that the last leadership was great, but in 2018, it seemed like the slate of candidates was just so much more robust and energetic and vibrant and real. Like they were, and this year I don't see that up or down the ballot. I mean, there's on my Democratic primary ballot in the county that I'm in, I don't think there is a single non-statewide Democrat. Every single Democrat that's going to be on the ballot for me is running statewide. And these are the only person that I know is Will Boyd. And Will Boyd is great. I love Will Boyd. He's a great friend of labor. But, the name recognition isn't there. In 2018, there were a lot of candidates running for state house and for state senate. And it just, I'm just not really seeing that this cycle. So what has the party been doing, between when you were elected chair and now to try to make and to try to encourage people to run, to try to build up candidates, and why haven't we been able to kind of see the fruits of that strategy?
Well, we went out and we recruited candidates. We had candidate trainings through the party. I can tell you personally, I've been turned down more than I was when I was asking girls to go to prom with me. It's been difficult. And I think part of that is because the landscape changed after Doug won, and then he lost, spending $15 million and basically well-known incumbent with resources. And then for him to lose in the same way that many others had lost, I think had a significant impact on the decisions that many viable candidates who were thinking about running decided, it's not feasible, doesn't make sense. So talking to many people, statewide candidates and legislative candidates alike, we were getting the same responses. And it's a difficult decision. Running for statewide office or running for local office is a very difficult thing.
Yeah, I'm not running for office. So
well, I think anybody that makes that decision now, you probably have to question their sanity. But running for office is not an easy thing. It's not a safe thing. And it's not a comfortable thing. So for the people who did decide to do so, we've got several candidates running for governor, several candidates running for U.S. Senate. We've got several candidates running for Congress, and we've got a great slate of legislative candidates that I think are strong enough to break that supermajority. And I think you'll see some of the results of those that were candidates we're working with in North Alabama, especially to try to break it. But you're right. The slate of candidates from 2018 to now has definitely changed. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the realities are changing. And I think people are taking that last race that they saw statewide with resources and a well-known candidate, and watching him losing that way certainly suppressed a lot of excitement about whether or not you're going to run. And look, when we took over this office, we were very clear that this is not a 2-year thing or 1-year thing. This is a 10-year rebuild that's going to take breaking the foundation, losing hard, but changing the narrative so we can create more candidates in the future.
One of the things that you've done since taking office is drastically increase the staff of the state party. When you took office, there was one full-time staffer, I believe, and now there's 14, if my information is right. What are they doing, and how do you feel like that investment has been paying off?
I think we have a fantastic staff. Those wonderful emails that people are tired of getting from me, the social media presence, the actual organizing of campaigns and county committees and putting out fires across the state, doing our data, creating a database of emails, and actually over the course of the last year, we've got the largest recurring donor base that we've ever had. I mean, those things are all due to the fact that we've got a working staff in place. So the messaging, the organizing, the trainings, the fact that the candidate recruitment, and the fact that we've got somebody in the office that not only answers the phone, but also answers questions or knows how to answer them, get those answers, I think are a lot of the benefits you're seeing from the staff. So going forward, we weren't going to be able to do anything at all. Just having one full-time person sitting in the office. It was going to take, like they say, take a village. And we had to get people on the ground to do things like clean up our email database and things like that in order to, again, try to build a foundation for the party to build from.
You mentioned the county parties and stuff like that. What are y'all doing to support the rebuilding of county parties? As you know, I think there are some counties where no party exists and hasn't existed for a while. What are y'all doing to kind of revitalize the lower levels of the state party?
We're certainly helping many county parties redo their bylaws and reconstitute themselves so they can start meeting. But many people don't know that the county parties are responsible for administering local primaries. So we're trying to make sure that when they have a support system in place when something happens, we're dealing with several issues with that right now. We have a liaison that works with our county parties to try to reorganize them to make sure that they're in compliance and that they're capable of actual helping candidates. And to that end, it's something that we've been working on for months. So we organize monthly county party chair meetings. Obviously, some attend, some don't. But we are, aggressively and actively trying to recreate a 67 county strategy through our county party so our candidates have resources that they can pull from when they're running for office.
What is the plan to support candidates who've decided to run this year? What are y'all doing for them?
Well, we've already, for the ones that don't have opposition, we've already given them access to Vote Builder, which essentially would cost you thousands of dollars, but the party is giving those candidates, to the best of our ability, a free access to it and to help to manage it. And also logistical support. Several candidates have reached out to us about how to manage a social media campaign, how to fundraise, what they can and can't do, and how to do it. And we've provided logistical support to those candidates as well to answer some of the basic questions, also help make connections for those folks. Now, obviously, we can't get involved in a contested primary with multiple Democrats. But if you are running and you don't have Democratic opposition and you're headed to the general, you've got a resource there to help you answer some of the basic questions about what you can and can't do, how to do it, helping you organize, helping you get a social media campaign together, helping you, and we've helped candidates find campaign managers and so forth. So we're just trying to be as much of a resource as possible for candidates that are running.
Representative, I wanted to ask on behalf of quite a few listener comments that we've already received this morning, which is that given the lack of candidates in quite a few local races and even in some state races, what would you say to listeners who aren't sure if it's even worth it to participate in the primary next week or maybe even in the general election in November?
Well, there are statewide candidates on the ballot for governor, for Senate, and for Attorney General. and for judge ranks. Now, our Democratic and Secretary of State, now our candidates for Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Supreme Court are unopposed. But the ones for governor and U.S. Senate need your support. And I'm pretty sure most of you guys, this is not just a statewide election, it's also a local election. That means county commissioners, sheriffs, and many other local officials are also on your ballot that need your support. So you need to participate in the primary and make sure that not only are you supporting your statewide Democrat of your choice, but also your local county commissioner, your local legislator, because there's a few contested primaries in the Democratic primary on that side. And also get to know those folks because they're going to be the better choice going into November.
We've got some folks that are not, not super pleased with, that listen to the show that aren't super pleased with Democrats at the state level and at the national level. What would you say to folks like that who are either members of third parties or considering supporting third parties, or just aren't terribly interested in the in working with the Democrats at all? What would you say to folks like that?
This answer is probably going to surprise you, but one of the things about me is I don't really mix words. I share their frustration. In the politics of trying to find ways to get elected versus trying to find ways to make a difference, it's very difficult for people to find a place in those two major political parties that match some of the most fundamental things that you're concerned about. But what I can tell you is, as you pointed out, Jacob, earlier, there is a difference. When you're talking about things like labor rights, I think it's obvious who supports those. When you talk about a woman's right to choose, I think it's obvious who supports that. And over the time, it's become very obvious that one party is about freedom of convenience, meaning that if you look like me, act like me, think like me, talk like me, we can talk. But if you don't, we just want you to leave. There's a place for you in the Democratic Party. So I share your frustration. As a Democrat in Alabama, obviously watching what goes on in national politics and not seeing the same aggression about voting rights that I think is necessary in order to protect everything else that we're fighting for. It's frustrating. And not seeing the same activity on protecting a woman's right to choose and so forth. But I can tell you that your participation is necessary, and wherever you decide to participate, in whatever party you're part of, I want to make sure that you look at the candidate and pick the candidate that matches what you believe and what you think is most important, foremost. And also, if any candidate is engaging in this reckless rhetoric, instead of telling you what they're going to do when they get the position, it should automatically disqualify them.
Yeah, I think I really, seeing some of these ads from some of the Republican candidates, I feel like they think I feel like they think people are stupid, and it's very frustrating. So I appreciate your time. I do appreciate your time, and we had this. There's a fella in the chat who's been asking this question a lot, and I'm not, y'all are in the super minority, so. But there have been some things that passed in the Alabama legislature. So he's asking for one thing that y'all were able to pass in the last session. And so do you have anything that passed through the Alabama legislature that y'all were really pushing, or y'all were really fighting for, that did pass, or something that you wanted to highlight before we let you go?
I think, to be very honest, I think most of our progress this session came from killing bills and changing bad bills. It's very difficult in this environment for a Democratic legislator to introduce legislation and get it passed. Over the course of the last 4 years, I can only speak for myself. I've got legislation through, but it's been, watered down from the lens of what's acceptable to Republicans. And, but so for us, and I'll take this as we managed to effectively wage a campaign to stop the protest bill. I think that's one of the worst bills that we've ever seen. And I think also we were able to cut some of the rough edges off of the concealed carry legislation this session, which is, I think one of the worst bills I've ever seen. But it was, if you can imagine the version that passed, it was much worse. And many others. But I understand what he's saying. And being in the legislature, introducing legislation that's reasonable and fair, and it puts the focus on people first, and watching it not even get a debate in committee is frustrating, which goes to that point. We need to break the Republican supermajority, and we have candidates across the state of Alabama running for legislative seats that will make that possible.
Chris England, representative for Alabama House District 20, we appreciate your time. Hope to have you back on in the future.
Thank you, and I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Yeah, that's Chris England, representative for Alabama House District 20, chair of the Alabama Democratic Party. We've had a great show so far, talking Starbucks, Trump, Alabama Democrats. If you missed any of it, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also listen to the full show or catch clips that interest you. Just search for the Valley Labor Report. And now we're on TikTok. We're going to go to a break really quick. And when we come back, during the break, I'm going to decide whether or not I want to talk about abortion or I want to riff about the elections on Tuesday. We will see, so stay tuned.
Energy Alabama supports consumers and is a leader in advocating for them. We have been able to successfully fight off utility rate increases in the state, reduce fees for electric vehicles, increase electric vehicle infrastructure spending, and secured a $100 million refund by Alabama Power after the utility overcharged customers for fuel. To learn more about our work advocating for customers and join the fight, go to energyalabama.org.
There's a lot of talk about a shortage of workers, but that's not the case with IBW 558. We have provided our customers over 3,000 workers and performed over 3 million man-hours in a pandemic year. With 8,000 OJT hours, 900 classroom hours, OSHA 30, and a state license, our members receive the equivalent of a master's degree. That's what makes IBW 558 the right choice for your electrical needs. Look us up at Facebook or at IBW558.org.
North Alabama DSA is looking for folks to work for a better North Alabama. They prioritize mutual aid, municipal activism, and union solidarity. Contact them on social media or dsanorthalabama@gmail for more information.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at iamaw44.org.
Hometown Action is a grassroots organization building a multiracial, working-class movement for racial, gender, economic, and environmental justice in Alabama's rural communities. We stand in solidarity with Alabama workers and are proud to support the Valley Labor Report's efforts to inform and build the Southern worker movement. Please visit hometownaction.org and follow our social media channels at Hometown Action to learn more about how you too can get involved to make the South a better place for all workers. Solidarity, y'all.
Support for this program also comes from the Ironworkers Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need ironworkers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Ironworkers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. Report. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Ironworkers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only Union Talk radio program. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host and fellow agitator is Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, give us a call. Our phone line is open. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. Again, that phone number is 844-899-8857. If you listen to the program as a podcast, you can leave us a voicemail at the same number. If you call in right now, though, we'll probably have to take your phone after we get off of the radio. See, we continue the show for like an hour and a half after we get off the radio online. So you'll have to find us online to get the rest of the show. You can go to YouTube, The Valley Labor Report, Facebook, The Valley Labor Report. One of these days, we have a TikTok now. We got a TikTok, TVLR FM. And one of these days we're going to be going live on TikTok as well, but not today. You can only see the little clips that we've got on the TikTok. But yeah, so I would highly recommend, if you're listening to us on the radio, that you find us on YouTube and you continue listening to the show, because let's be real, nothing else of value is going to come on after us. It's going to be the same. You listen to conservative talk radio all week. I mean, come on. Like, how much do you really need? How much do you really need? Do you really need another hour and a half? Or do you want to hear something, you want to keep hearing something different for an hour and a half? You want to spice up your life?
And we have...
Get out of your echo chamber.
We have Luis Leon coming on.
Luis Leon is going to be talking about the Amazon Labor Union.
And he's doing some of the best reporting
it's
in
great.
the country on this.
Awesome stuff.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so, we don't have enough time. We'll talk about abortion next week, and it'll be like a main show topic, I think. I think it's important enough for a main show topic, so we'll try to get that in next week. But, man, primary elections are Tuesday, and not great. So, whoo!
Yeah, I mean, we did ask about this, I think, multiple times with Chair England, but the reality is there's a lot of us who, if we want to have any influence whatsoever on local politics, we're going to be voting in the GOP primary on Tuesday. I've talked to a lot of people who said, hey, I'm voting Republican for the first time ever because that's the only way I will get to vote for who's my district attorney, who is my sheriff, and, or in some cases, they just want to vote against Casey Radinsky, which I can't blame them for that.
Yeah. I mean, man, it's so, but the thing is that they're all the damn same. I mean,
so you have bigots who pander to big business, and then you have the big business types who pander to bigots. Kind of a distinction without much of a difference, but...
For governor, you've got Kay Ivey, which is probably the big business pandering to the bigots. You've got Tim James, vice versa. You've got Lindy Blanchard, who is endorsed by Mike Pillow.
Now that's really what I want to know. Who's the pillow guy behind? Now that's
right.
When I go to the polling booth.
Now I'm not understanding. So she was running for U.S. Senate, and she was running as Linda Blanchard, and everybody has that's been memory hold, and all the Republicans are respecting her change of name, and I'm not understanding that because her birth certificate says Linda, but they're all calling her Lindy. That's not scientific. It seems like political correctness to me. Seems like everybody's been eaten by this virus of political correctness. I'm not going to call her Lindy. Her name is Linda. It's on her birth certificate, damn it. We've also got Dean Odle running for governor, who is a flat earther, legitimate. I mean, not on his campaign website, a flat earther. He was interviewed like he was a serious candidate by No Spew 1819 News. He also thinks we should have a military coup. I mean, not like, okay, I think the election was stolen and we should do something about it once we take power again, blah, blah, blah. We should reforms. This guy reckons the military should execute Joe Biden and take over the presidency again on his campaign website.
This dude, he saw a clip of Myanmar,
and he was like,
"Hey, this
hell yeah, hell yeah, that's cool, man." We've also got Lou Burdett, who is like, I don't know, he seems normal.
He just seems like your normal,
just like
over
a
the
business
mountain
guy, yeah.
Republican type. There are a couple of other more fringe candidates. There's a Donald Jones, I believe, who's very pro yoga, interestingly enough, as a Republican. And then there's Dave Thomas, who's a small town mayor who hasn't run a very strong campaign. He came out strong on marijuana legalization.
I did see
that. That's an interesting angle to take in the Republican primary, but he hasn't gotten any traction. So
for U.S. Senate, we've got Katie Britt running, who is endorsed by every single council of bosses you can think. We've got Mike Durant running, who has attacked his sister for
coming forward about abuse,
coming forward about incest, and he's a carpetbagger, I think. Pretty sure he doesn't even live in Alabama. Got Mo Brooks, who's been endorsed by Marjorie Taylor Greene. For Congress in the 5th District, we've got Dale Strong. Wardinsky was endorsed by, he's like a pedophile enabler, Jim Jordan? Wardinsky wants to abolish DHS, though. That's an interesting...
Broken clock, right? Twice a day kind of thing. Right. If you missed our takedown of Casey Wardinsky a couple weeks ago, definitely check that out.
You got Paul Sanford. I don't know anything about him. There's an interesting guy running for State House in District 2 in Muscle Shoals, Terrence Ireland. I don't know. Maybe check him out. Some Democrats are running. Will Boyd is not fine, I guess. Or he is. He's good. He's a friend of labor. So, I mean, that's about it.
Alabama Rise did put out a voting guide that if you're not sure yet about making your plan to vote, where your polling place is, or you want to check out a sample ballot, all that stuff, check out Alabama Rise. Just go to their website. They have a voting guide. They'll point you in the right direction.
Yep. Find us online. Find us for Overtime. We're going to be talking to Luis Leon about the Amazon Labor Union. Until next week, all power to the workers. All right, bring me back.
Just wanted to avoid some dead air on the FM there, just in case.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard for us to judge sometimes.
Well, I've got the central time by seconds up here in my window, so I was watching it.
Nice.
And I did a really good thing. I ended it really well. I think it went well. So We got a caller on the line. Adam, you want to bring in that caller, see what he has to say before we get to Louise?
I will try my best. Yes, I will.
All right. Ben, we may need your help. I'm not sure if we'll see. While we're waiting for Adam to bring the caller on the line, we do have a great overtime lined up. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying with us.
For our caller, you should be live now. If you can say something and see if we can hear you.
Yeah, I don't hear him.
Well, if you want to stay on the line there, and we'll try to get you sorted out and get you in on the show. And we also have Luis Leon. He is in the waiting room, so he will be coming on shortly. Really excited about that. He's one of my favorite writers with Labor Notes
he
and
has really been doing he's really been doing great work on the Amazon Labor Union stuff. The phone number, and you can also text us 844-899-TVLR, 844-899-8857. And we've got some other good stuff coming up. We're going to be talking about how Tim James proposes to bring down the prison population. We're going to be talking about Elon Musk and the AEA doing something cool. So we're going to go ahead and take a break quick while we figure out the phone situation and get ready for overtime. So thanks for staying with us, and we will be right back.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Union Talk radio show. We are now off the radio. We are online. We've gotten rid of the FCC censors. We can say whatever the hell we want. We're in overtime. We've got some really good stuff. Luis Leon is in the waiting room. We're going to be talking to him about the Amazon Labor Union. But before that, we had a call. We had a caller, so we wanted to bring them on the line really quick. Get that out of the way before we bring Luis on. So, caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from? Eva, Alabama.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a heck of an interview.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I just haven't seen anything hardly from him, and that was that was basically it. But yeah, I'm definitely
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'll have to. Right. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I appreciate it, and you know we're definitely not opposed to stuff like that. We brought on Terrence Ireland, who's kind of similar. He's a Republican. He's running for State House District 2. The North Alabama Labor Council endorsed him. Actually, there's no Democrat in that race, so definitely not opposed to that. I think we've kind of got to be realistic as far as callers muted on YouTube. It says. But anyway, yeah. He was telling us about Stacey Lee George, saying that that there's several things that his platform is that's in line with what folks on the left might appreciate as far as prison reform. I think marijuana and holding
court-appointed
prosecutors, attorneys accountable.
Yeah. So he mentioned Stacey Lee George running for governor. I'll check that out. Because
we'll check that out.
I think we need people speaking to the criminal justice crisis in every race, honestly, from governor all the way down. And I saw a couple of folks who are district attorney candidates in Limestone County. Actually, I mean, both Republicans who were speaking that kind of language. Now, are they just talking the talk because that's the appropriate thing to say when you're being sued and taken to court by the Department of Justice? I don't know. But I hope that this is a sign that even among the more right-wing elements of our government, that they're recognizing that the current status quo of over-incarceration cannot hold. It is failing the people of Alabama, disproportionately failing working-class people, poor people, people of color. It puts law enforcement at risk, frankly, when you really look at it.
Yeah.
So Yeah, thanks for calling, and appreciate your support of the show.
Yep, appreciate it. All right, and we're actually going to be talking about Tim James's answer to mass incarceration after we get done talking to Luis.
Well, that'll be a good little contrast.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and bring him on. Luis Feliz Leon. He is a staff writer for Labor Notes. Luis, thanks for joining the show. I appreciate it. Have we got him on?
Yeah, Luis is on. It looks like he was still muted, so we're trying to get that taken care of.
Can you hear us, Luis?
He may have stepped away for just a sec while we talked with our caller there.
Yeah, well, so last time we talked to Luis, we talked to him about the Bessemer campaign. And I remember at that time he was like, well, I asked him about the Amazon Labor Union, and this was before the first vote. It was right before the first vote was going to happen. And I asked him about it, and he was like, well, I haven't really done a whole lot of reporting on that. I don't really know much about it. I can't really speak to it. And now he has written, I mean, I think the definitive reporting on the Amazon Labor Union has come from Luis, I think.
Well, Luis, just let us know when you are back online. Oh, here we go. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was listening to the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So there was a lag there. So thank you, Jacob, for those kind words. Yes, last time I spoke to you folks, I didn't want to comment because I had not done the work of talking to the workers. And, at Labor Notes, we try to do what's unheard of, which is go directly to the workers and talk to them. So without having done that, I didn't feel I was in a place to speak about the Amazon Labor Union. Right. But I feel that has changed now.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, definitely. Seriously, folks, if you haven't read much, or if you haven't read Luis's work about it, you've got to, read his work in Labor Notes, in the American Prospect, in the Real News. I think he's got articles about the Amazon Labor Union in all those places. They're all very fantastic. And so since we last spoke, they've had the first election, which was a huge win, and then the second election, which was kind of a big loss as far as the numbers are. It was a smaller sortation center, but it was like 2-1 against the union. So let's start with the first election. What were some of the things that came out from your reporting on the first election at the fulfillment center in Staten Island that won the union election? What were some of the things that stood out to you as you were talking to workers in that center?
Yeah, so I just recently wrote the cover story for Indies Times about the win at the Amazon Labor Union had at the JFK 8 fulfillment center on Staten Island. And one of the things I highlighted in that article was the fact that, yes.
I've got it right here.
Beautiful cover, right?
It is a beautiful cover. I don't know if folks can see that, but yeah, it's really nice. It's a good one.
So one of the things that I try to highlight in that profile is the fact that there were 3 groupings that were critical to the success at JFK 8. One of those groupings was veteran workers, people like Derek Palmer, people like Chris Smalls, who had been at Amazon for more than 5 years. And that made them, in terms of how Amazon workers describe themselves, veterans. You also had folks that went into the warehouse with a political commitment to organize. That doesn't necessarily make them salts, because usually salts are paid by a union to go in with the intention of, organizing. These were people that were roving socialists, if you will, that were seeking a cause to support. And once Chris, Derek, Gerald, Bryson, and Jordan Flowers walked out in March of 2020, they went around the country protesting at Jeff Bezos's mansions. And through that process of these protests, they attracted fellow travelers, if you will. And these folks came to JFK 8 and took up jobs there. Another group is obviously the folks that, led this walkout. So people like Gerald Bryson, Jordan Flowers, Derek Palmer, and Chris Smalls. They were the original 4 leaders of the Congress of Essential Workers. And they had moral authority to talk about the abuses of power at Amazon. They went out and protested to keep their coworkers safe. And that's something that resonated with their coworkers. That facility had been open since 2018. So that meant that they had built relationships with some of those veteran workers. We all know that the turnover at Amazon is about 150%. So to me, it was striking to learn that in addition to Chris and Derek, there were all these other workers like Michelle Valentin Nieves, who had been there for about 3 years. And they were a familiar face on the shop floor that workers could turn to when they had any grievances against management. So I think that was key to their success, was that they had a deep bench of natural leaders that could connect with workers at the warehouse, right? People that they could identify with.
What do you think? How did they go about? What was their strategy that you feel like made them able to win, where nobody, you've got those 4 groups of workers, and obviously that. What was it about those groups of workers that made them successful where everybody else has failed? Amazon has been around for 20 or 30 years and nobody has been able, $1 million campaigns have lost huge. Petitions have been filed and withdrawn. And these people, nobody's with nothing, right? I mean, and they were able to win an election by a real substantial margin. What was it? Just that something that they said a lot was that their independence helped them. Does that track with your conversations with other workers at the facility, that their independence helped them?
Yes and no. I mean, there were workers that I spoke to that said, we're waiting for the Teamsters. So for some workers, the fact that they were a scrappy independent union was a deficit, right? It was not something that was appealing to some workers. So they had to persuade enough workers that they were a credible union, right? So I think where they were effective, here's where we get to the yes part to your question, was that a lot of times one of the things that union busters do is they try to third party the union, say that it's this outside entity that is trying to organize workers. In this case, that argument fell flat because the workers themselves were the ones building this union. And the things that they did, the culture of organizing that they built with cookouts, with sharing, breaking bread together in the common areas, that was all something that was driven by the workers and by their own understanding of how Amazon mistreated and alienates workers. So they tried to counter that alienation by creating bonds of solidarity. So I think that one of the things that contributed to their success was definitely the fact that they were an independent union, the fact that they were not handicapped by the risk aversion, the fear that cripples the official labor movement. Those handicaps were not there for them, and they were able to maximize on their scrappiness and creativity because there was no playbook that they were really following. I mean, they did read Jane McAlevey, they read William C. Foster, a communist organizer from the 1930s. But that was among some of the more self-identified leftists. But it's important to not take away from the Black leadership of this movement and the folks that that started this were Chris, Derek, Gerald Bryson, Jordan Flowers. They were the ones that set this in motion, and they were not reading William C. Foster. You know, they were just organic leaders. So I think I go back and forth in terms of like, what was their secret sauce, right? And I think what I've settled on is that there was a lot of what we talk about at Labor Notes around rank and file organizing. Like, this was something that was genuinely driven by workers, that was bottom up. And I think that really had an appeal for workers. Another thing that I've said in describing this victory is that it was characterized by momentum organizing. So a lot of the organizing that we have seen, especially at places like the News Guild, that has been very successful, has been an organizing powerhouse in New York City and across the country, is structure-based organizing, where people map out, you know, the leaders. They make sure that they have solid majorities before filing for an election. So we didn't see any of that here. We saw a very fearless campaign where workers put everything on the line, and they won.
Some of the things that you mentioned, as far as the risk averseness of the official labor movement, would be captured by the fact that nobody files for an election without at least 50%. And that's even incredibly rare. Usually it's they never file without 60, 70, 80, 90% of cards. Whereas the Amazon Labor Union filed with 30%, which is, looking back on it, it makes a lot of sense because the turnover is so high. But that's something that just other unions would have refused to do, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece for a publication based out of New York called New York Focus, where I kind of looked at how a lot of experts within the labor movement kind of discounted their chances of winning. And one of the things that was commonly referenced was the fact that they filed with 30% or like the bare minimum, right? And I got some pushback from a friend that's organizer of SEIU. He said, well, in healthcare, we filed sometimes with that. But here's the rub. Those units were about 30 people. You know, they were very small, like healthcare units. This was a warehouse of 8,000 plus workers. Right. So it's a different ball game, you know, to file with that. You know, the fact that they did cookouts, like I used to be a researcher with 32BJ SEIU, a property services union that represents porters and security guards and airport employees in New York and New Jersey. And I remember when we were preparing for campaigns, like, you know, we had to legalize everything before we took any steps. So imagine doing a cookout by a bus stop. I think a union would be worried that that the canopy of the bus would catch fire and, you know, they will be liable. So even something as simple as that, not to mention, you know, the fact that they were also giving out weed, which is legalized in New York. You know, I don't think an official union would have looked upon that, you know, favorably as a tactic.
Right. And, you know, that is kind of funny that you got some pushback about saying that filing with 30% is not common, because everybody, I mean, you know, I talked to a lot of people in the run up to this, and there was actually concern about, like, these people are going to screw it up for the rest of us, right? You know, I mean, there was some real, you know, I don't want to say antagonism, but there was real genuine, like, worry that not only are they going to lose, but it's going to be bad for you know, the big dogs, for the real unions to come in there after and try to clean up their mess.
Yeah, I mean, we heard the same thing about Bessemer, right? Where people said, you only go into an organizing campaign when you know that you've done your homework, you've covered your bases, because what it results when you don't do that is demoralization, right? We saw the opposite happen after the first loss in Bessemer. We saw that it actually
they were one of the inspirations for the Staten Island campaign.
Right. Well, I mean, folks were folks were looking at what happened. They went down to Bessemer. They saw how things were going, and they said, we're going to do it differently. So for them, they kind of drew a negative lesson from that and said, like, this is why you have to do it worker-led. So yeah, I mean, it definitely did play a role in terms of their strategy. Because one thing that's important to remember about this campaign, it's that it was kind of 2 years in the making, but it wasn't like in a calculated way. It wasn't as though they said after the walkout, we're going to first do this walkout, then we're going to generate excitement, and then we're going to petition to form, to petition for an election and form an independent union. None of that was in the cards at that point in time. They were trying to draw attention to the unfair firings, to the plight of essential workers at Amazon warehouses and throughout the country. And then through that process of struggling against Amazon and other employers and their callous treatment of workers, they decided that they were going to form an independent union. So I think it's just remarkable how that happened, because it just goes back to the importance of union democracy, to the importance of worker-led movements that are not, created from the top down to generate buzz and excitement. Like, this was something that was real. And I think because it was real, people were able to get behind it because it wasn't manufactured in any way. It was a genuine rank and file upsurge.
One of the things that we talked about last time you were on is there was a change in tactics from in the Bessemer campaign. And I think that, I know people that were on both campaigns, that organized in both campaigns. And I think that there is a bit of frustration from people, especially on the first campaign, as far as like, they were like, we were doing the best that we could, right? And that the contrast between the Staten Island campaign and the first Bessemer campaign, I think, is kind of frustrating to some of those folks, and I totally understand that. They were like, people forget, like, we were in the middle of the first wave of the pandemic, right? We didn't have vaccines. People were nervous. Like, the house calls seemed really scary to people, and we were trying to do the best that we could, but noted that in the second campaign there were house calls, they were taking actions, they were winning things. How do you feel about the strategies employed by the second Bessemer campaign and the first Staten Island campaign? How do they stack up? Compare and contrast them, kind of, if I'm not being too rambly.
No. I think it goes down to the fact that they just had a deeper bench, of rank and file leaders. I've heard different things from the RWDSU folks, that they had their core committee was about 20 people, which is similar to what they had in Staten Island. But here's the thing: the folks in Staten Island were at the warehouse every day. All day. They were basically there 12, 13 hours a day on their days off after working 12-hour shifts. So they were living and breathing, organizing every single day. And what was propelling them to do that was a firm conviction that they wanted a union, and that the conditions at Amazon were, were just terrible enough that they were going to put everything on the line. I think when you have that level of initiative on the workers' part, like, that's something that can be replicated. I feel with RWDSU, they had folks outside, and they were doing things, but they were not necessarily at the warehouse, 24/7. They were not, their visibility was not as high as it was for the folks on Staten Island. Another thing too is that the facility in Bessemer is a newer facility, right? So I remember when I went down to Alabama for the first election, and, given all the comms resources that were put into elevating Jennifer Bates and Darrell Richardson as like the leaders of that campaign, I asked workers about that. I asked, like, what do you think about Jennifer? What do you think about Darrell? And they didn't know them. And because the warehouse was so new, and it's so massive, that they just didn't have a chance, to to build that familiarity. I don't know if that changed or how much that changed this time around, but this is the thing that we always say at Labor Notes. Workers choose their leaders. It's not the other way around. So when you come in and you're an official union and 3 or 4 workers reach out to you and say like, hey, people are hot under the collar, they're demanding a union. And then those folks become the spokespeople. That might work or it might not, because it's hard to assess what their standing is in the warehouse. And that's where it matters the most. So by contrast, when I spoke to people about why they supported the union, they talked to me about Chris Smalls. They talked to me about Derek Palmer. They talked to me about members of the committee. So they were familiar with the people that were pushing for this union, and they could reference them by name and say to me at shift change, oh yeah, I spoke to Michelle, I spoke to Karen, I spoke to Maddie. So it was just a level of familiarity that was just not the case in Bessemer. Now, here's the thing. Part of that was aided by the fact that the workers in New York were taking public transit. So they were lingering after they got out of the warehouse. I think, to be fair, the folks in Bessemer had a tougher chance because people were leaving the warehouse. They were getting in their cars and driving home. So there was not that much of an opportunity for them to spend time with folks. They could have done it during the break areas. They could have done food. But the thing is that it also has to be true to the context, right? Like what is true of the context in Alabama that's different from New York. So in New York, it did resonate with workers that the union was feeding them, that the union was visible at the bus stop. In Bessemer, it would have been interesting to figure that out. The only people that know the answer to that would be the workers that are in the warehouse. So I think those are two things. Another thing about the house visits, right? The Amazon Labor Union tried house visits, and then workers got very angry about it. They said, if somebody shows up at my house, I'm going to fuck them up. So this is New York. In New York, it's not, you don't want people bothering you coming to that Southern hospitality doesn't exist out here. So
yeah, they didn't get invited in for sweet tea and biscuits, I guess.
Exactly. No,
which I did multiple times when I went house visiting with RWDSU. I went in and I don't think people offered me tea and stuff, but it wasn't we didn't get any biscuits, but yeah, it was definitely I did get invited in and I sat and talked to people for quite a while.
Right. But this is the thing, right? Like they were really attuned to the realities of the workforce in Staten Island, right? Not some abstract, lesson or theory. So when the playbook says you must do house visits, they tried that, but then they tore up. They shifted very quickly once it became clear to them that in addition to a lack of Southern hospitality, workers were also embarrassed about their living conditions and they didn't want to invite people in. A lot of the workers that I spoke to were working 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. So they didn't want to invite people into their homes and kind of feel ashamed of how they were living. So that also factored in. So because there was a small group of workers, that information was captured and they acted on it fairly quickly, right? In a traditional union campaign, you have to go through the ropes in order to implement like a shift in strategy. It doesn't happen by the flip of a coin toss. So I think that's one of the things that aided the independent union in Staten Island. They were just more nimble in terms of responding to things. So if they saw, hey, a worker approached us from the African community at a captive audience meeting, they figured out, how do we get that person involved? And then Brima Sila became one of the leaders. This was 2 months into the organizing. He set up a WhatsApp chat group with a lot of African workers. He was multilingual. So he had a lot of respect and standing within the Staten Island community and specifically among immigrant African workers. So they were just able to bring people in fairly quickly. And that's not always the case, in a big campaign, where you have a chain of command that you have to escalate things, through. So I think those were decisive, factors. But I think ultimately the fact that the warehouse had been around for a much longer time, I think was very key. And
So
those
what-
veteran workers.
Right. So what was the difference then between, do you think that was the key, that maybe there weren't as many veteran workers in the second Staten Island? Because the second Staten Island election did end with a loss. So what do you feel like the differences were between those two campaigns, even though they were run by the same union?
Yeah, no, I think that's a key point that you hit on. Like, absolutely, they didn't have a deep bench at LDJ5, the sortation center. The face of the campaign were folks that had gone in with the intention of organizing. And the facility had opened in March of 2020, so it's relatively new. It's made up of
Bessemer.
Right. It's made up of part-timers, and a lot of the part-timers, they didn't really have those deeply felt grievances that you had at JFK 8. When you talk to workers, even the workers that were adamant about voting against the union, they would talk about the fact that the 12-hour shifts were destroying their bodies, that they couldn't endure at Amazon more than 3 months because the setup of the work environment was one that just burned through people. At LDJ5, folks were doing 15 hours a week. They had a second job. The main complaint was the fact that they didn't have enough hours. Some people wanted to be full-time. So it was a very different environment. And because they didn't have as deep a bench, they had to rely on some of the natural leaders from JFK 8. And again, if you go back to what I said initially, the campaign at JFK 8 was 2 years in the making. Even though it wasn't planned that way, that's the reality. They were organizing and agitating people for 2 years. So they didn't have as much time with the LDJ5 warehouse. And it's a different kind of warehouse. Right. So those deeply felt grievances were just not true at LDJ5. And the work was not as grueling. Some people said, the job is relatively easy. All I want is for Amazon to, when I become certified to drive a forklift, I just want to be paid more because of that. So those were the concerns.
How has the ALU responded to the loss?
I mean, I think what they are doing is trying to build up, like similar to the folks at RWDSU and Bessemer. They're thinking about, even though we didn't win, we got a sizable number of folks that supported the union. We're going to continue to act like a union within the warehouse and continue to build on that. Which is the same thing I've heard from the RWDSU folks in Bessemer. Even though they lost, it hasn't been certified, but it seems that it's trending to a loss. They are going to build on the number of folks that they were able to bring in. So I think for the folks at LDJ5, it will be the same. It will be a matter of how do they continue to keep those folks engaged. Right now, they have to begin prepping for contract negotiations, even though Amazon has refused to recognize the union and is stalling and is going to continue to stall. They have to continue to prepare their troops to put everything on the line, including shutting down the facility to get recognition and begin bargaining. So they have a lot of work still ahead of them.
What about expanding the campaign? Chris Smalls he went on it was Fox Business or Bloomberg Business, and I think he was like trolling the host. He said the host asked like how many other warehouses, and he said something about we've got contacts at every single Amazon warehouse in the country. And I don't doubt that, but if having one contact at one warehouse of 8,000 people doesn't that doesn't a campaign make. But what are the serious plans that you know of to expand in New York and nationwide? I mean, or do you know anything about their priorities as far as like, are they going to try to fight for a contract harder at JFK 8 and then try to expand? Are they going to try to do vice versa, or are they going to try to do both at the same time? And and all of that is going to take support from the organized labor movement, I think. And so how is organized labor going to play into the campaign moving forward? And I know that was a lot, but I think you can handle it.
Thanks for the vote of confidence. So I mean, I don't want to speak for the independent union. What I can say is that they are going to hold a national convening after the Labor Notes conference. It was going to happen in June, but they're all coming to Labor Notes. There are going to be opportunities at Labor Notes to meet with other Amazon workers across the country and the world. We're going to have Amazon workers from Poland, from Germany, from other countries come and be part of a meeting with all the folks that are trying to organize Amazon in the US. So that's one thing that I hope will be productive and fruitful for all the workers that are trying to take on Amazon. In terms of the strategy of what happens with all those folks that have reached out to them, we at Labor Notes facilitated a conversation between different workers across the country, including Cause, which is based out of North Carolina. They're working with the Southern Workers Assembly. They're a small committee of they've told me they have about 80 people that are trying to file for elections in Gardner, North Carolina, I believe. And, they've heard from folks like that all over the country. I think what would aid them the most is for them to focus on winning a contract at JFK 8, for other workers to support that fight by starting a bunch of fires at other facilities throughout the country to bring some pressure to bear on Amazon, and so that they can negotiate, have some leverage in negotiations. I think that it would be very difficult, given their numbers, for them to divide their forces and dispatch organizers across the country. But definitely holding calls with workers across the country, sharing their lessons, consulting, I think that would definitely be helpful. But I don't want to underestimate the challenges of a first contract when you only organize one facility. Amazon is adamantly anti-union, and they don't want this momentum that the Amazon labor union has unleashed to catch on and to spread to other warehouses. So to the extent that the Amazon labor union can spark other rebellions and other warehouses by their example, that would be the right way to go.
Right. Absolutely. Jacob, I'm gonna jump in here just for a sec. You probably want to ask more about what Amazon is doing to continue their anti-union drive, but something you mentioned earlier that stood out to me was that both ALU and RWDSU here in Alabama, even in the face of a disappointing election result, they're still sticking around. They're still acting as if they're the union, because they are, regardless of the election results, they can still operate as a union and organize and represent workers. And sounds like that's what they're doing. And I just wanted to, highlight that, because there's a bad reputation throughout the history of organized labor, especially here in the South, where, the big unions come in, they try at a plant, they lose, they pack up, and you never hear from them again. I don't know how prevalent that is in more modern organizing, but that's definitely something that has, stuck around, I think, in the imagination of workers who experience that. So I think that's really promising. And I think that is something that gives me some optimism that we're not repeating some of those same mistakes of the past, because I think that would just be so deflating were that to occur, to live up to that stereotype of just coming in, hoping you can win. When you don't, you dip out of town. I think that would just be incredibly demoralizing. So to hear that, in both situations with different types of unions, different types of facilities, the organizers are sticking around, I think that's very positive.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I hope that continues to be the case. I mean, the Mid-South Council is not, despite what Amazon says, is not like they're not parachuting.
Right.
They're parachuting from Huntsville.
Right.
And Birmingham. They're parachuting from Birmingham and Huntsville.
Right. They're just hopping in the car and going down the road. Yeah. They're not
right.
From headquarters. But yeah, I think that's really promising. And I think that is going to be essential to combat the really deep anti-union tactics that Amazon's deploying. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, the thing is that after the first election, right, the RWDSU did, in terms of national clout, they took a big step in saying, we're going to take on this behemoth, and, people doubted them, but it was definitely the right call, to take a swing at Amazon. And what will happen, what will be determinative going forward is once the Teamsters begin, organizing, and the spotlight kind of shifts from different unions and the work they're doing, that folks remain committed to the workers that are there and continue to bring in new leaders and new folks to the work. I mean, you think about the organizing that has happened at Smithfield in North Carolina, like that was a decades-long fight. So in terms of organizing Amazon, I think it's going to take years. And this momentum right now may potentially be sapped depending on what happens with inflation and if we enter into a recession. So that's why the time is now. If you are an Amazon worker and you're thinking of organizing a union, do it now. Right. Now is the time to act. Strike while the iron is hot, because we don't know what will happen with a new administration, presumably if the Democrats were to lose. The NLRB has played a constructive role. We have seen, like with Starbucks workers, they just issued a Giselle order, which is very rare in Buffalo because of how extreme the union busting was. I heard earlier Jacob mentioned that Starbucks workers in Alabama are also trying to organize. So we just need a wildfire of organizing to continue to build this momentum. What we're seeing right now is momentum organizing. The moment of strategic campaigns, as important as those are, that's in the past. Maybe it will come back. Who knows where things are in a few years. But right now, I would say we are with Starbucks, with retail workers. In Massachusetts, we saw Trader Joe's organize. We saw Apple Store workers organizing. So we just need more and more of that.
Yeah,
ride the wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's definitely the time to organize wherever you are to try to reinvigorate your union, because the labor market, it's just everything is really. It's just a really good time to organize. There's obviously still going to be a lot of risks. It's still going to be hard, but
and a point you made earlier was that the more Amazon facilities across the country are undergoing organizing campaigns, and the more workers themselves in these facilities can step up as leaders and take it upon themselves and not necessarily like wait for Chris Smalls to show up. Mm-hmm. The more they're doing that, the more that helps that contract fight at JFK 8, and I think that's huge. Yeah, I mean, I think it's you got to look at it as kind of a guerrilla warfare thing, and the more spots they have to deal with, the more you spread their resources. And I know it seems like Amazon has unlimited resources, and in a lot of ways, I guess it that's an accurate feeling, but they do still have to plan. They do still have to spend money, and the more their attention can be divided, I think that really does play into our hands.
Right.
How do you feel about the fact that we're going to have multiple unions going after Amazon, and now we're having multiple unions going after Starbucks? In the past, turf wars they played a very big role in the labor movement. They were the source of a lot of fights. They were the source of a lot of controversy and contention. With Starbucks, we've got now UFCW organizing in Wisconsin, and we've got Teamsters now organizing in New York, I believe it was, Local 130, I think, or maybe 13. And then, of course, you've got the Amazon Labor Union in New York. You've got the RWDSU in Alabama, and then you have the new Teamsters president, Sean O'Brien, being quoted in Bloomberg as saying that he wants the Teamsters to be the only union to organize Amazon, which I have to think that that's a misquote, because that does not track with his behavior, with his meeting with Chris Smalls, with the Teamsters support of the RWDSU. I mean, I don't understand that comment. But how all of the unions have been supportive of ALU in public. How true do you think that is? Are we looking at the beginning of really ugly and distracting turf wars for Amazon and Starbucks, or do you think that the labor movement will be able to be more cooperative? And do you think we'll be able to be more cooperative going forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think the current tune that everyone is singing is cooperation, but that can always change, once the stakes are higher. So I feel like right now, the American Postal Workers have thrown their support behind the Amazon Labor Union. The Teamsters have as well. In terms of strategic sectors, I mean, I do think it is. I think the labor movement does have to be strategic in terms of thinking about like what makes sense in terms of our industry, like for us to organize. So the idea that you have unions that are hot shopping and have a little bit of, healthcare, a little bit of education, a little bit of everything, it just reduces their power. And I know that it's been in response to the decline of manufacturing for certain unions, like the radio workers, UE, for instance, a militant union. They just had a big victory by organizing MIT workers. And obviously, they've lost members to once General Electric started offshoring its jobs. So it's been a very real struggle to grow as a union that has been concentrated in a manufacturing base, right? Like obviously manufacturing is not gone. That's an overstated claim, but it's definitely declined from its peak, and unions have suffered as a consequence. So I think the way to approach that is to think about how can unions come together as a coalition and say, we're going to take up this big behemoth, and how are we going to carve it out so that there's an agreement based on strategy. For the Teamsters, it would make sense for them to prioritize delivery stations within Amazon's network, for them to prioritize those third-party contractors because they're a direct threat to UPS drivers. So, I mean, that is it's an existential threat to the survival of the Teamsters and for the workers to retain the standard of living as Teamsters drivers. They have to respond to that threat from Amazon. So I think that's one way to kind of take what O'Brien said and say, okay, if the Teamsters were to focus on delivery stations, who focuses on the fulfillment centers? Who focuses on the sortation facilities, right? Because Amazon has a lot of different warehouses. Who takes on the web services division, the most profitable, division within Amazon? those workers have to also be organized. So think of what the News Guild did by organizing the tech workers at the New York Times. They realized that moving forward, when it comes to contract negotiations, they're going to have greater leverage by having the tech workers in the same union with journalists. So I do think the labor movement and the unions that have some skin in the game when it comes to organizing Amazon, they need to put together some kind of consortium and think about how are we going to organize this large company. I mean, that UFCW led the way with Walmart, which it still needs to be organized, but there's also Target. There's also, so yeah, I mean, I think the turf wars are going to happen. It's unfortunate, but it's to some degree inevitable that unions are going to try to pursue a shortcut. But I think right now there is some real momentum behind a more rank and file led efforts to organize, and the unions are kind of following the lead of the workers. So we've seen that very clearly with Starbucks. SEIU Workers United, they have come in and they have been supportive. But when I've talked to the workers, it is a Starbucks workers who handles their comms, so it's very scrappy. So I mean, I get why some unions want a piece of the action and say like, okay, how can we insert ourselves here? But there's so many workplaces that are unorganized. And it's not just Starbucks. You see this with the weed dispensaries, where folks are also fighting, to organize those sectors. But even for RWDSU, like I went down to Gainesville, Georgia, after there was a chemical leak. And I'd be curious why the Mid-South Council doesn't go into Gainesville and talk to workers there and see like, hey, we represent poultry workers in Alabama. We have a shared interest in as workers in these poultry plants. This is what we've done with our workers in Alabama. This is what the benefits of a union are. So I do think that unions do have to reassess the hot shopping and being general unions and becoming more focused in key sectors, because that's where their power and leverage will come from.
Right. Luis, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Adam, do you have anything else?
No, just that we'll see you at Labor Notes in a couple weeks. Really excited about it and really appreciate all your work and the work of the entire Labor Notes team for putting this conference on.
Yeah, we're looking forward to Jacob facilitating Organize the South, our panel discussion on the great stuff that's happening down south. So thank you all for joining us.
I'm looking forward to it. Dan sent me the list of folks that are going to be on. Looks like it's going to be a good panel. Think we're going to be able to do. Dan is trying to get me set up to where we can do the show live from Labor Notes on Saturday morning. So maybe we can just pull some folks as they're passing by and pull them in for an interview really quick. But
it'll be like the Super Bowl for us.
That's right. Yeah, or as Kim calls it, Labor Prom. So.
Labor prom, yes.
Thanks, Luis. Really looking forward to it. See you here in a few weeks.
All right. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, bye-bye. Absolutely. So that was Luis Feliz Leon. He is a staff writer for Labor Notes. He has done the definitive reporting on the Amazon Labor Union. Check him out anywhere you read anything about labor news in these times, the real news. The American Prospect, and of course Labor Notes. We've got a couple other topics that we wanted to get to in overtime today, and the first one is Elon Musk. Elon Musk made he made a lot of news last week. First by announcing that he is a Republican. Adam, let's play that.
And I would class myself as a moderate, and neither Republican nor Democrat. And in fact, I have voted overwhelmingly for Democrats historically. Overwhelmingly, like I'm not sure. I might never have voted for a Republican, just to be clear.
Right.
Now this election, I would.
Now, Elon coming out as a Republican would only be a surprise to you if you don't know anything about bosses or his record. In 2014, he donated $10,000 to Greg Abbott. In 2015, he donated $50,000 to Rahm Emanuel, who is not technically a Republican, but he may as well be.
He, certainly is a right-winger and was the nemesis of the Chicago Teachers Union and really, the Chicago social justice movements the entire time he was mayor.
In 2017, he donated at least $50,000 to Republicans. So look, I don't care if Elon as an individual votes for Republicans. It's really neither here nor there. It's not going to make a whole lot of difference. His money is like where his power is, right? His power doesn't come from Elon as an individual in the voting booth. Like, who gives a shit, right? It doesn't matter. His power is in his money, and he's been using that money to support reactionary, anti-worker politicians on the Democratic side and the Republican side for years. As long as he's had the money to throw around, he's been doing exactly that. But let's see why he says that he's coming out. Now, let's play that clip.
The Democratic Party is overly controlled by the unions and by the trial lawyers, particularly the class action lawyers. And generally, if you'll see something that is not in the interest of the people, on the Democrat side, it's going to come because of the unions, which is just another form of monopoly, and the trial lawyers. That's where actions will be happening from the Democrat side. They're not in the interest of the people. And then, to be fair, on the Republican side, there's if you say like where there's something like not ideal happening, it's because of corporate evil and religious zealotry. That's generally where the bad things will be coming from on the Republican side, that are not representative of the people. So. In the case of Biden, he is simply too much captured by the unions, which was not the case with Obama. So in the case of Obama, you could have, he was sort of quite reasonable, and I think he took more of a view that, obviously you need to take the concerns of the unions into account, but there are bigger issues at stake, and unfortunately Biden does not do that.
I wish we had the Biden he thinks we have.
Yeah, I mean, wow.
Corporate evil and religious zealotry, apparently not as big of a deal as trial lawyers and unions. Unions that represent about 10% of the country's workforce. Pretty interesting.
Yeah. Rai in the chat says, dude goes full teal here. He gives away the whole game. The right only uses culture war as a way to destroy unions. And I mean, that's exactly.
Absolutely. This is so revealing. And I don't want to jump the gun.
No. Go. Yeah.
There, because if you think about it, corporate evil, which he named specifically as something Republicans are about, and he's accurate there.
Right.
How do we fight back against corporate evil? The corporate evil that is producing Gilded Age level of inequality, corporate evil that is literally destroying our ecosystem and threatening the existence of our civilization and all life on Earth as we know it. Corporate evil that is represented in the form of a global empire. Corporate evil that leads to war and destruction all across this planet. Corporate evil, that's what we experience as working class people. And how do we fight back against that? Well, we don't have many tools in our tool belt to really fight back against it. If you are an individual worker and you've been screwed by your boss, by your workplace, your options really are to go to the union, and or to a lawyer.
Right.
Now, there's, of course, direct action. There's demonstrations. There's petitions, boycotts. That's not to say that there aren't other means of forcing change. But it's very revealing that those are the two things that he focuses on. The fact that people will go to unions and to class action lawsuits to seek justice, to seek remedy. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that his own companies have a horrible record when it comes to union busting, when it comes to discrimination and earning class action lawsuits. But the truth is, most bosses, most owners really don't give a shit about you. They only care about the value you create. And to get them to respond to your concerns takes power.
Right.
That involves the collective power of a union, and that involves the credible threat of litigation. And as a labor advocate in my past, I can tell you there were many situations that I got resolved to the benefit of the worker only because the bosses realized there was a credible threat of litigation.
Right.
In fact, I think you've got a story coming out of Chilton County schools later in overtime that would be a good example of that. I've dealt with those similar type issues because unfortunately, the way our world works in this capitalist economy is that the power is concentrated at the top, and the bosses know that you depend on this salary or this wage to be able to feed your family. They know where the power lies. They know what they can get away with, and they are constantly pushing those lines and pushing those boundaries. And, being able to file an EEOC complaint, being able to take someone to court under the Fair Labor Standards Act for, taking them to the Department of Labor for violating overtime pay, those are some of the few weapons we have. And, it's one of the only ways you can actually get some real change at the ground level. So I think it's very revealing that that's what he's highlighting here. I think he's being overly charitable to the Democratic Party, frankly, to assume that they're captured by these things.
Right.
As someone who is a worker, as someone who has been a labor advocate, I don't see that. I don't see that the Democratic Party is, just dominated by labor unions and by, our kind of lawyers, the lawyers who would take up our cases and fight for us. So I think that's just but it's revealing that I guess he fears that because there's obviously a momentum here in this country that Luis was just talking about. There is a momentum of organizing across various industries. We see that public opinion polls are heavily in favor of unions. People support unions by and large. People want a union if they don't have one yet. And if they don't have a union, they still support the unions that they're aware of that are working in Amazon and Starbucks to organize.
Right.
And so I think there's a sense that the labor movement is resurgent, that people as workers are reevaluating things. That's why they're resigning. That's why they perhaps are willing to file lawsuits. That's why they're willing to file complaints with federal agencies. And so, I think we should probably take it as a compliment that Musk is out here putting his cards on the table like that, because it reveals there is a certain sense of fear among the ruling elites.
Absolutely.
We are waking up.
And Jeff Bezos is doing the same thing. He's acting incredibly bizarrely on Twitter now, quote tweeting the president, trying to dunk on him and things like this. Just totally out of character stuff that Bezos is doing. Because Amazon donated like $1 million to Black Lives Matter or something, right? And so, these the two richest people in the world who tried to, for decades, present a liberal facade are now, their masks are falling off and they're showing themselves to be, just the same as any other capitalist, and they're aligning with the party that most helps them, and of course both of these parties help them, but they're now coming out. The Republicans have always really gone to the mat for capitalists, and Democrats have tried to have generally speaking,
they want to have it both ways.
They want to have it both ways, and they try to be a party of the boss and the worker, and so of course they're doing most of the time they're doing more to serve the boss, but they're throwing bones to people, and so and they've been throwing more bones lately, and just imagine how think about how little the average worker's life has changed since Biden took office. I think we're not shy about...
Or to the extent that it's changed, how much of that's actually been positive or negative.
Right. We're not shy about saying that there's a difference, but the difference is for most people pretty marginal. And that marginal difference is causing these lunatics to freak the hell out.
Yeah.
Could you imagine being the richest person in the world and having a breakdown about what is going on right now as far as worker power and everything?
Right, because we actually
crazy.
have an NLRB that is doing its job for the first time in my lifetime. And one of our commenters, wisely pointed out how these government agencies, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for example, or Department of Labor, generally speaking, the odds are stacked against you. It's not as if, and I know this is sort of a public misconception. People act as if you can just file these frivolous lawsuits on a whim for discrimination or for wage theft or other issues, and the freak out over litigation is not in touch with reality.
No,
because the reality is, especially in a place like Alabama, where the judges up and down are reactionaries, is that you're probably going to lose, no matter how much evidence you have for your case. No matter how strong it is, no matter how strong your lawyer is, the odds are stacked against you.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that to dissuade you from pursuing it, but it's just a reality. And I'm glad one of the commenters pointed that out. They said they've been in the situation multiple times and they always lost despite evidence. And believe me, I know that feeling.
Right.
I've lost an arbitration despite clearly, having the evidence on my side. And I've lost cases on behalf of other workers that it was no dispute, as any objective person could have seen that we were in the right and the employer was in the wrong, but the system is stacked against us. And I say all that to say, as stacked against us as it is, even that is too far for people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Right. They don't want us to win ever. No. The idea of even having the opportunity to file a complaint that probably isn't going to win is too much for them.
Well, that's why I said trial lawyers too, right? Trial lawyers. What is he's talking about class action lawsuits there, and the alternative to class action lawsuits is me as an individual consumer somehow finding thousands of dollars to hire a lawyer for myself to get back $30 that AT&T stole from me.
Right.
That's not going to happen. And so what happens if we don't have class action lawsuits? There's no way for me to get back the $30 that AT&T stole from me. It's just the law goes unenforced.
So there's barely any accountability in the system as it is today, but even that small window of accountability and opportunity for redress is just too far. And I think what it goes to is that if you look at the economic statistics of this country, it's very clear we are in a Gilded Age era. If you look at the wealth and income inequality of this country, it's very reminiscent of the Gilded Age right after the Civil War. And what I see would-be the capitalist elites in this country want to return us to the similar political, social, cultural conditions of the Gilded Age. We already have the inequality,
right?
So they want all the other stuff that comes with that,
right?
You know, to finally undo what's left of the welfare state, what's left of the New Deal and the Great Society, and the trust busting.
Right.
All those, you know, reforms over the past century that were fought for, that people died for, you know, however inadequate they may be, that is a bridge too far for these folks. They want complete and total control and power, and they don't want to give up any of that power. They don't want any of us to have any opportunity to fight back when we're screwed over on our wages, when we are discriminated on the job. You know, I guess the only option, I don't know. I don't know that they want us to have any option whatsoever.
Well,
they much prefer to deal with it, I guess, if they have to, with binding arbitration and non-disclosure agreements.
And that's the next there, because there may be another reason. There may be another reason for his coming out as a Republican at this time.
As soon as he said that, I figured, okay, they must have evidence of him being a perv.
And that's exactly what happened. Insider has reported an incident where he sexually harassed a flight attendant and gave her $250,000 to shut the hell up. From the article, the attendant worked as a member of the cabin crew on a contract basis for SpaceX's corporate jet fleet. She accused Musk of exposing his erect penis to her, rubbing her leg without consent, and offering to buy her a horse in exchange for an erotic massage, according to interviews and documents obtained by Insider. Buying her a horse. In addition to that, they were encouraged to go to masseuse school on their own dime so they could be better flight attendants for Elon Musk. And after this all, you know, she came forward. This has been years ago. He paid her $250,000 and had her sign an NDA. This is coming out because of a friend of hers, not her. And so because Elon Musk is a free speech warrior, I'm sure he's going to be releasing her from her NDA.
Right. Yeah. Let's see how committed you are to free speech when it comes to NDAs.
Yeah. But I mean, this is another important reason for protections on the job, and why, you know, things like trial lawyers and things like unions are so important for working people, so that we don't have to put up with bullshit like this. Having this guy wave his fucking dick in my face, like, I don't have to put up with that shit, you know.
And no one should.
Nobody should. Nobody should. Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, put out a statement. First and foremost, we've got flight attendants' backs everywhere in the universe. Musk's alleged actions in the cabin are a stark reminder of why flight attendants first organized 76 years ago, to beat back discrimination and sexual harassment and assault by claiming our power to put misogyny and the privileged corporate class of men in check. And Kim Kelly wrote about this in her book, Fight Like Hell. And it was really, really good sections on flight attendants and how they fought against sexual harassment and discrimination and things like this. Back to the statement from Sarah Nelson. Musk believes that money gives him the right to do anything that he pleases, regardless of the rights, humanity, or protestations of others. The fact that he required flight attendants to become licensed masseuses on their own dime demonstrates what we see all too often. The super rich think they own everything and have to pay for nothing. This attitude is all too common to flight attendants and is something all workers have had to deal with from day one. But this is no longer day one. We are in the time of the worker, and we will not allow Elon Musk and his friends to continue treating workers as second-class or disposable characters in their PlayStation. Flight attendants are not just another accessory on Musk's little rocket. His corporate America no longer holds the power it tried to take from workers. We know our worth and the power we have together. We're here on Earth, there on SpaceX, and everywhere. He's going to have to face it or face the final frontier frontier without any of the people who make it possible.
Amen, sister.
Fantastic statement from Sarah Nelson. And that's, flight attendants that work for Elon Musk hit her up.
Yeah, absolutely. But that is pretty disgusting, though, the requirement to be a licensed masseuse on your own dime. Lifestyle checked masseuse and flight attendant, 2 separate jobs.
Right. Yeah, and that's, so this is probably one of the reasons, or a big reason that he's coming out as a Republican, because who is going to be the group of people that is going to protect sexual harassers? Who's going to protect pervs? Who's going to protect, abusers? It's the Republicans. and the Democrats, maybe to a certain extent, but the Republicans more so, certainly.
Right,
they're a lot more comfortable with it.
He can pitch it as a badge of honor. It's the woke mob coming
and that's
to
what he's
cancel
doing.
him.
But like the hours before the
probably about the same time they reached out for his comments. As reporters tend to do, right? They reach out to the person before they publish it. And that's probably when he decided to write this tweet. If I had to guess. Oh,
it
okay.
is, actually. Well, so not that video that we watched. It was from a couple days before the article. But he's been tweeting like really, really weird stuff in the run-up to and then since the publication. But he was, talking about something. Something about I'm going to be, I'm going to be attacked by the woke left or something. He tweets so much that I can't find it right now. He tweets more than me, I think. But he works a lot, is what they say.
And I think some of this could also be him freaking out because Tesla's stock has been tanking. This whole Twitter purchase that he was engineering is not going the way he planned it to.
Right.
At least it doesn't seem like. So
well, and there was so here's the tweet. In the past, I voted Democrat because they were mostly the kindness party, but they have become the party of division and hate, so I can no longer support them and will vote Republican. Now watch their dirty tricks against me unfold.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
but also there was something else that he did that caught all of the attention, and he did it on the same day that Tesla recalled 130,000 cars.
Yeah, he is a master of distraction.
Yeah,
he knows how to drive media cycles.
Just like Trump in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 peas in a pod.
Yeah.
They're perfect for each other because they are great at that kind of distraction. They can get the media talking about whatever they want them to talk about as opposed to issues within their own companies and, legitimate issues.
Right. Let's talk about a couple crazy Alabama people really quick.
There may be a few of those.
There may be a few of those. We didn't get to this in the main show, but it's not important enough to save it for next week. So let's go ahead and play that Dale Strong attack ad against Wardynski. Adam, I want you to tell me, as somebody who was an educator during his tenure as superintendent, I want to see if Dale Strong's ad about Wardynski tracks with reality.
Okay. And just so everyone knows, I have not heard this or seen this, so this will be new for me.
Our kids are our future. Liberal Casey Wardynski failed them. As school superintendent, Wardynski defended Obama's woke curriculum and opposed school choice. And while he now claims to oppose critical race theory, Wardynski deployed a radical re-education program in Huntsville City schools, teaching white privilege and other CRT lies. Flunk Casey Wardynski. Choose Dale Strong, the conservative leader committed to keeping liberal indoctrination out of our classrooms. Trump conservative Dale Strong for Congress.
I'm Dale Strong, and I approve this message.
Okay. Where do I start? So, by no means could anyone ever objectively describe Casey Wardynski as someone who is progressive, who is left, who is liberal. anti-racist. None of those things would accurately describe Casey Rudensky. And but there is some truth to this ad, and I'll say how. He really did adamantly claim that Common Core would be taught in Huntsville City Schools regardless of what the state government said. That's true. He was big on Common Core. There's a lot of reasons. The whole debate around Common Core has been totally hijacked by right-wing weirdos who think it was, Obama's plot to turn their children gay or, something bizarre like that. That's not really why you should be concerned about it. It was a set of standards basically developed on Bill Gates' dime by a small cabal of corporate influencers, not actual educators. So that aside, yes, Rudensky was very pro-Common Core, and it had nothing to do with putting progressive curriculum in place at all. The other piece of it about critical race theory. So, and I may have mentioned this to you before, Jacob, the first time I actually encountered critical race theory, the phrase, in the wild was about 2015. I was at a training for Huntsville City Schools where we were developing equity teams. As I mentioned in our video on Rudensky, Huntsville City Schools is under a consent order. It's a consent decree from the Department of Justice and federal courts over the longstanding desegregation case from 50 years ago. So basically, there were some training requirements that came out as a part of that to try to address inequities in the system and racism within the school system. So I was at this training, and yes, critical race theory was discussed. I remember it being mentioned and flashed up on the screen on the PowerPoint. White privilege was discussed. There were a couple of consultants, I think, from Colorado who were doing this training. And so this all really did happen.
Wow, so Comrade Rudensky.
So now how much did he know about what was occurring there? I don't know. He's certainly not a proponent of any of that. He is a proponent of trying to see what he can get away with under federal supervision, and conducting these trainings was a way to, get the federal government off his back. Because ultimately, his goal and the goal of kind of the local elites here was to get the DOJ and the federal courts out of Huntsville City Schools. And the only way they could do that was by getting this consent order and, feeling a little pain for a while, which included having training such as this. Because their long-term goal is that ultimately they're left to their own devices, which means they can build schools wherever they want. They can have schools as segregated as they want. For our very local listeners, think the Hampton Cove area. There won't be a high school in Hampton Cove under DOJ supervision. But if they manage to get DOJ out of town, that's when you can have a nice, new, shiny high school for the white side of town. But it is funny to see Rudensky running as he's Mr. Trump. He's the Trump bootlicker. He's an America First nationalist. His opponents are now painting him as this progressive critical race theory proponent. So he's just, he's getting hit from all sides. He's hopefully not going to make the runoff, but by all accounts, he is the second place candidate for this 5th congressional district.
Oh, wow.
He's raised about $500,000. A lot of max donations, a lot of corporate and PAC money has flown into his coffers. There's a very legitimate chance that he is in a runoff for this race. And Casey Rudensky I've never met a man more narcissistic in my life, and I've dealt with a lot of bosses and managers and supervisors of various stripes and politicians for that matter. None of them come close in terms of the level of narcissism and really a crook through and through. So that's my thoughts. Couldn't happen to a better guy. Couldn't happen to a better guy. I hope that all the right-wing weirdos continue to pile on him. As sad as it is for the discourse of our country and the ways in which, you know, CRT is like a dog whistle for virtually anything they don't like. You know, if it happens to hurt him in the process, at least there's something good to come out of it.
There you go. We've got another right-wing weirdo, Tim James. So we've got you alluded to this earlier, but we've got a prison problem here in the state of Alabama. And we have among the highest incarceration rates of all the states in the U.S., and the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world, and I think even in the history of the world. Like, I think that there are more people in American prisons than the Soviet Union had in the gulags.
At the height of Stalin.
At the height of Stalin, right? So
absolutely, that is true.
So Tim James has some ideas about fixing it that he laid out in an interview with right-wing propagandist Jeff Poore. He actually starts out well, saying the long-term fix is to reduce recidivism. Okay, you know, so far so good. 65% of prison inmates wind up right back in prison. So if you can bring the recidivism down from 65 to, let's say, 45%, that is a tremendous savings in money because it costs about $25,000 to incarcerate an individual in our prisons. Okay, you know, I mean, that's so far so good, right? So how does he propose that we do that? Does he support sending fewer people to prison in the first place? Because we know that just the act of sending somebody to prison makes them more likely to go back. Does he support maybe a massive public jobs program in impoverished areas? Because we know that poverty is a leading indicator of crime. Maybe he is proposing something to incentivize employers to hire ex-convicts.
Those are all logical, you know, reasonable solutions to our prison crisis in this state.
But he rejects all of those and says they should go to church more. From the article, he is quoted as saying, how do you do that? Outreach. Christian outreach programs work. Prison Fellowship Ministries founder Chuck Colson proved it. I want a massive faith-based outreach program in all of our prisons in the years ahead, and we can reduce recidivism.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we've got church and state issues here. We've got the fact that, well, it just doesn't work. And then the fact that this doesn't actually address the problem of people being arrested, right? So, but hey, they'll pray for you. They'll pray for you. They don't mind locking you in a cage, maybe even keeping you there in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. They don't mind you going into a facility that's dangerous and overcrowded, where you may contract a disease, where you may be beaten, where you may be killed. But they will pray for you.
I mean, this guy is just like not. I mean, he's like not a smart fellow.
He's, you know, it's a sad reflection of Alabama that he's even a serious candidate.
Yeah.
You know, it's because both with him and some of these others, you see their ads and you hear their rhetoric, and it's almost a parody.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some of these. There was an ad I saw recently for a judge that no shit I thought was like an SNL spoof. I thought it was just I thought it was a parody at first. But you know, evidently they believe that's what the voters of Alabama want to hear. And to the extent that there is any truth in that, that's the reflection of 200 years in this state of elites dividing and conquering.
Right.
And ensuring a population that's undereducated, underinvested in, and torn apart by various forms of bigotry and fundamentalism.
Yeah. We'll wrap up with a better story. We've got an episode out of Chilton County, Alabama, that shows the importance and the benefit of even a union so weak that they don't like to be called a union. AL.com has been following a story about overpayments in the Chilton County school systems. Employees are now expected to pay back tens of thousands of dollars that they were supposedly overpaid over the course of years. The county has been paying them for years, apparently more than they were supposed to be getting. And now they're saying you got to pay back tens of thousands of dollars. And the AEA, the Alabama Education Association, who is a professional association for educators in the state of Alabama, in other states, the NEA affiliates call themselves a union, but the AEA shies away from that. But they're fighting back with a lawsuit. From a recent article on the saga in AL.com, the suit claims the two employees were unaware of the overpayments. They were not given due process, meaning they had no chance to contest the overpayment, and employees will suffer serious, adverse financial harm through no fault of their own if they're required to pay the money back, which is like obviously true. I mean, I don't see how you could dispute that. Judge Sibley Reynolds granted plaintiffs' request for a temporary restraining order to keep the district from automatically deducting payments while the lawsuit is considered. The Alabama Education Association is providing legal representation for the plaintiffs, both of whom are members of the organization. We want to make sure these employees are treated fair, AEA Associate Director Taryn Stokes said, and we know that they don't owe one dime back to the Board of Education. What they're trying to do to them and their family is unconscionable, which is true.
Yeah, and that, I've experienced that here in Huntsville. I'll never forget some of the cafeteria workers and custodial workers who were caught up in a similar issue where the district allegedly discovered they had been overpaying some of these employees, in this case for years as well. And it was a relatively small amount, but
right, over years it adds up.
Over the years it adds up. Once you factor in overtime, it adds up. And what would happen is somebody in the finance department would, discover this mistake, allegedly, assuming it's true, right? Because if they made the mistake on the front end, what's to say they're not mistaken now?
Right.
With their new math. But regardless, they would discover it, and then in the cases I dealt with, the school district wanted it all paid back the very next check, within within that month's check. And it could have been a problem that existed for years.
Right.
So my argument was, well, if it took you 2 years to make the mistake, why can't you allow the person 2 years to pay you back?
Mm-hmm.
Seems reasonable. And when you're talking about a custodian or a cafeteria worker, they're lucky if they're bringing home $1,000 after taxes and benefits are taken out.
Right.
And you want to claw back payments all at once?
Crazy. I don't think, to be fair, if we wanted to do such a thing, the Chilton County Board of Education is not doing that. They have proposed payment plans, but
yeah, and I think part of the dispute here is whether or not
they even owe anything.
They even owe anything at all.
Right.
But I definitely experienced it where, the district, I think, made a valid argument that there had been overpayment that seemed on the up and up. And that wasn't really in dispute, but for some reason they thought it was acceptable to try to claw back these payments all in one chunk.
Right.
Without considering the fact that this custodian is in my office crying because she doesn't know how she's going to keep her lights on for the month.
Bosses, man.
And that shows you the lack of empathy, the lack of concern they have for employees. It's just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do applaud AEA for taking up this fight to the courts, and good for the judge for actually issuing the temporary restraining order. A lot more of this needs to happen because it's happening all over the state, I can assure you.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to be it for today's episode of the show. We appreciate your time. If you would like to help us stay on the air, you can buy our new hat. You can make a one-time or recurring donation, all at tvlr.fm. Share, follow, like, and subscribe on social media. We're now on TikTok. Tell your friends. And don't forget to review on your podcasting platform of choice. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, share your thoughts on the contents of today's episode, ask us a question, share a bad boss story or an organizing win, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, and we will see you next week.